Hello and welcome to Crucible of Words. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We are doing some pre-modern, but I'm commentating on an actual event that happened that I played in. So this is the Big Smoke Quarterly. These are sort of the biggest pre-modern events in the UK. Obviously there's 4 of them, and they're also the people running the Nationals event this year. So we've got a little breakdown of the meta game here before we start getting into the coverage. As you can see, Burn was the most represented deck, but only 5 copies. So there's a lot of variation here. We had a bunch of Stiflenaut, quite a few Allure in here, Enchantress, Blue White Control, some smart and handsome person, I'm sure, on this Jund deck. A little bit of Psychoton. As you can see, format is quite diverse with many different decks being played. So let's just get right into the coverage. It's a 6-round event with a cut to top 8. Let's just get stuck right in. So this is round 1. I believe on the left we have Simon O'Keefe playing a Storm deck with like Brain Freeze and things like that. And on the right, we have Isaac Carey playing Phyrexian Dreadnought. So in terms of this matchup, I think the Dreadnought deck is favoured because it has a lot of cheap interaction. It also has Stifle, which can stifle the trigger on the Brain Freeze. And there's not always the greatest amount of interaction from the Storm side. If the Storm deck is mono blue, which I believe it is, that means it's not going to have things like Swords to Plowshares that you sometimes see out of the white versions of the deck. So it's going to really struggle to answer a Dreadnought, and it doesn't take long for a Dreadnought to kill people. Right, we've got opening hands now. The Dreadnought player is keeping on 6 cards. So we're seeing a sleight of hand to begin with from Simon on the left here. Just going to want to be sculpting for a few turns and try and go off. So Isaac's leading off on a different piece of sculpting. This is Portent. So he's going to be able to look at top 3, choose one of them. Oh, sorry, not choose one of them. Put them back on top in any order and draw one of them in the next turn, but can also shuffle instead. So it's kind of like Slow Ponder. We used to see this in Legacy as well. I believe there was a Dreadnought in that selection of 3 cards. And he is indeed drawing a card. Looks like he drew an island off of that, I think. We've got a second island into Sapphire Medallion from Simon's side. So this is like the cost reducer that allows him to really pop off. So Isaac is going for the Dreadnought plan now. So the Dreadnought is in play, and he's going to have to use something to either phase it out or stifle the trigger. So we have a Stifle here, and now that is a 12-12 on turn 2 with Trample. Not that Simon's going to have a particularly large amount of creatures to block with. It's going to be like Cloud of Fairies and nothing else, really. A nice selection of basic lands from our opponents. Lots of islands in play, different preferences on the art. You can tell a lot about someone by the art they have. Alright, looks like Teferi's Isle is coming in. If you're unfamiliar with Teferi's Isle, it taps for blue, it comes in tap and has phasing. Alright, here is the Cloud of Fairies. So this is going to untap the Teferi's Isle and potentially allow Simon to really pop off and potentially even win the game this turn. Or rather, win the game next turn when Isaac can't draw any cards in his deck. So we're untapping the Teferi's Isle. And then this is going to be the blue mana in pool, I would imagine, is what this island in a different sleeve is being used for. From Simon's hand, I think that's a Frantic Search, which is going to net mana, because it's only going to cost 2 mana to cast because of the Sapphire Medallion, but it's also going to untap a land that taps for 2. Alright, we've got a Meditate first for just 2 mana, so this is going to draw 4 cards and skip the next turn, but hopefully, for Simon's sake, he's not going to need any more turns. Alright, the Meditate has resolved. How much extra juice is there left to squeeze here? Because I don't think there was a lot going on. It was Frantic Search and Meditate were the only cards before this Meditate resolved that were like actual business spells. Now Frantic Search can convert those non-business spells like Spare Islands into business spells. So here we see the Frantic Search. This is going to cost 2 mana, but it's going to untap 4 mana's worth of lands. Alright, this is a pinch point with the Daze from the Dreadnought player over there. That's probably game, I would imagine. There's no mana floating. Isaac gets to take 2 turns in a row and beat down with the Dreadnought twice. That seems like it's going to be very difficult. Yep, we've got the untap here, so this should be the game in pretty short order here. So the Dreadnought's going to bash in for 12. Apologies for the little bit of glare there. Yeah, and Simon is just scooping it up because there's no coming back from that. In terms of sideboarding, I think the Dreadnought deck is pretty happy with what it has access to already. It can board in things like Annul, which can allow it to counter the Sapphire Medallion and the Helm of Awakening if that's in the list as well. And maybe just some different counter spells as well if there are some there, but usually it's only going to be things like the Annul that are coming in here. On the other side of things, what can we see here? Bunch of misdirections, so that's some free counter magic, and some Annuls to answer the Dreadnought on the stack. That makes a reasonable amount of sense, and we're just going to let our players shuffle up and get to the next game. Our players are drawing opening hands here. I think I can peek. That looks like a powder keg, I think, in Isaac's hand. Yep, double powder keg. So that's a way of interacting with either a hunting pack if there's like a really weird pivot, which I think is very unlikely here, or it's more likely to be used to blow up a Sapphire Medallion or Helm of Awakening, which I believe Simon has a copy of each in his hand. Right, we're seeing the turn 2 Sapphire Medallion, but it's getting annulled. So this was the annul I mentioned in the sideboarding that's going to come in and be really useful here. Got second island, but no threat here. So Isaac is taking a control posture in this game with this particular hand rather than just a big Dreadnought send on 2 like we saw in game 1. The Dreadnought deck can play a reasonable control game as long as it's not trying to answer like creatures on the board. It's not great at doing that, but it's pretty good at countering stuff on the stack because it's a mono blue deck and it does draw extra cards via things like Gush. And sometimes you see accumulated knowledge as well. This looks like a portent into a shuffle for Isaac. Alright, back over to Simon now. I suspect we probably see this Helm of Awakening, but it might just be a turn where some sculpting is required, so there's a Merchant Scroll in hand, so we might see that pop off. Alright, we're just seeing a pass here. So taking it slow, trying to make sure to play around all sorts of permission. So now we see the powder keg from Isaac over there on the Dreadnought side. This will tick up and we'll just sit at 2 and then can blow the artifacts that are cost reducers, as well as also being able to maybe clip a Cloud of Fairies at some point. Unlikely that that's going to be what it's used for, but it's possible. We've got a sleight of hand here on Simon's side. It looks like there's an annul in the pile of cards, which could be something to slow down a Dreadnought, but it looks like the island is a choice here. It's more about him trying to win the game, I think, here, than stopping a Dreadnought, especially with this sort of posturing from Isaac where there's not any Dreadnought in play yet, and it doesn't look like he's sort of aggressively digging and moving towards that. He seems quite content to just sort of sit back and play a control-y role, and then eventually get there, try and leverage a few gushes along the way, that sort of thing. But once the powder keg ticks up to 2, it makes his life a lot easier as a Dreadnought player against this Storm deck. Alright, we are back over with Simon. Another Merchant Scroll. So it seems likely that you'd fire one of them off here. Firing the second one off into a daze might not be so good. The counter magic in the Dreadnought deck is going to be annuls from the sideboard, but then counter spells, daze, and foil. So counter spell is the only sort of clean answer. Foil does take quite a lot of resources, and if you can make your opponent hemorrhage resources, then you can eventually push through with your combo. So that might be sort of the line Simon's taking here. I don't expect him to play into a daze at all. That card, I believe, is mana short. So that's going to tap down all of the lands on Isaac's side if it resolves. I'm pretty sure that's what that is. Okay. Shuffling over and done with. I think we're heading back to Isaac's side of things. We're ticking up the powder keg to 2, which is the number it's going to sit at from there on. Alright. Just a draw-go situation there from Isaac. We're going for the Helm of Awakening here, not trying to mana short down first. This is probably just to get some spells out of the opponent here, because there's already a powder keg, so it's not necessarily going to be... Oh, an Arcane Denial. So this is going to counter the spell and allow both players to draw some cards. Right, we've got a real counter war here involving a daze as well. So no extra cards going to be drawn from this Arcane Denial. This could have been done in a way where you counter the original spell instead of the Arcane Denial. It's just a case of if you want to have extra cards or not. Because you get 2 cards, but your opponent does get another card as well. Right, we're seeing floating mana and then casting a Gush, a very common play pattern for this Dreadnought deck. You can play on a low land count because it's constantly bouncing them and has very cheap cards to cast. Right, we've got an Intuition here. We got any joy of finding a Dreadnought yet? Because if you give a combo player enough time, they will be able to win the game. That's just how combo works, because eventually they just have a critical mass of things and you can't stop it. So you do need to get the game over and done with. You can't just sit back forever. All right, we've got another piece of card selection here in a portent. Is this a keeper or are we shuffling again? All right, looks like another shuffle, so no dreadnoughts there. Knowing that the mana short is on the other side, waiting in Simon's hand, means that Isaac probably has to consider trying to get the game won because it might not be viable to just hold up counter magic if he gets shorted out of the game. Right, we're back over to Simon here. The snap is also a way that he can deal with a dreadnought if it enters the battlefield. I think that was a stifle pickup. I don't know if that was the piece that was missing from Isaac's hand to make a dreadnought. I suspect that's got higher priority here because it does answer a storm trigger off of like a brain freeze. So it's doing sort of double duty in this matchup. Alright, we've got a Lotus Petal, Frantic Search in Simon's hand as well. That looks like it's probably waiting for a cost reducer to really get things going. Okay, a Dreadnought has finally entered Isaac's hand. Is now the time to deploy it? And how easy is it going to be to defend? How much mana does he need to keep up to interact with what Simon's putting down? This is a really crucial turn. Having the combo and actually playing the combo are two very different things. Do you want to expose yourself to things like Snap at the cost of 2 cards? Do you want to tap down your mana? If you've got a mana short like we've already discussed, then the mana short is going to make it so casting these things is going to be a little bit difficult. Alright, we've got a Vision Charm here, keeping the Stifle up. So this is also going to phase out the Dreadnought so it can't be snapped on Simon's turn to build Storm. That's really the best sort of scenario for Isaac there. Looks like Simon is pondering what to do here. It looks like a snap in response to the Vision Charm. So by doing it this way, Isaac has exposed himself to snap. He could have stifled the Dreadnought trigger, and then when it got to be snapped, he could have then phased it out to dodge this. However, he valued having the stifle in hand as a piece of interaction. We do know that he's also got a counterspell in there. We saw that earlier, but does he want to spend it on trying to win the game himself, or does he want to spend it on stopping Simon from winning the game on the following turn? But there is a potential mana short's worth of mana heading his way. All right. Now we are playing a Dreadnought again, and we're stifling it this time. So instead it was just a double send with counterspell backup, and there is another snap. It seems pretty good from Simon's position. We've got a counterspell on the snap. That's probably going to work here. Interesting not to use that counterspell on the first time around. But maybe the idea was using the Dreadnought is just going to be getting these cards out of your hand, and I don't know. You get to keep the Stifle. I think there's definitely different ways that Isaac could have played this turn. Like I said, could have done the Stifle into the Vision Charm, or could have counterspelled the first go around and then still have the ability to just keep more cards in hand and keep your opponent guessing a little bit more. There's no cost reducer on Simon's side of the battlefield, so it's going to be hard for him to go off here. There's no Teferi's Isle or cost reducer. You need one of those two things to really work, because if you don't have the cost reducer, then all of your untapped stuff is just mana neutral. And same with the Teferi's Isle, it does give you +1 mana every time you untap stuff. Let's see what this Merchant Scroll finds. It did resolve, but there was definitely a moment where it looked like Isaac might have a spell here. So I don't know if Isaac's got enough cards to have a foil, but it's something of that ilk. It's probably not going to be a Daze here, because that's going to be relatively easy to play around. Alright, it looks like a snap is being found by Simon, which is just going to get rid of this Dreadnought when the time comes. And if the Dreadnought player is boarded in something like a Misdirection, which you sometimes see out of Dreadnought decks, then it's not going to be useful here because there's going to be no other valid targets for the snap. But this is Simon spending combo cards and, tutors that he needs to get his deck running, but he's spending them on stuff to keep himself alive. And this isn't going to permanently answer Dreadnought, it's just going to delay it until another enabler like a Vision Charm or a Stifle appears. Alright, the snap is targeting the Dreadnought. Alright, we are dazing. So this is to trade that daze for a Lotus Petal. Alright, I think we are back on Isaac's side of things. Is he able to slam another Dreadnought? Just another Powder Keg. I don't particularly like playing out the second Powder Keg. It does insulate you in a way, because obviously the first one will always blow up the second one because it's always going to be on 2. However, this means that a bounce spell doesn't keep you off of it if you have them both at 2, which is kind of relevant. So I can understand why it's being played. All right, we've got a Gush here. This is big news. Okay. There's a lot of cards in Isaac's hand here. Can we assemble a Dreadnought from that side or not? The answer is not this turn. Another island on Simon's side. He's sat on a bunch of, like, Cloud of Fairies and stuff. I think there's an Annul in there as well. It's going to be very hard to push through a Dreadnought here. But Simon's not really advancing his game plan either, and there's already a lock trying to break any sort of cost reducer he may play. Got a lot of draw-go action right now. I think that was a foil drawn by Isaac there. Okay, we finally found a cost reducer. So this is a situation where having this second powder keg in play is kind of awkward because you're just going to give it up for nothing. I don't know if maybe Isaac had a full grip of cards in hand due to like gushing and stuff, so it was just easier to play this out instead of going to discard. I think you can probably just discard an island at some point, can't you? Alright, Cloud of Fairies to start things off here from Simon. Alright, this is just the 1-1 beatdown mode to maybe try and get the powder keg to pop. I don't think this 1-1 beatdown when both players are still at 20 is really going to matter. This also gives a target for snap later on. To sort of pop off in your own way on the storm side of things. Alright, Isaac is going to clean up here. We are in for a long one. 1 damage. So 19 plays 20, and it looks like we're back. And a Dreadnought has been drawn by Isaac, so there is the chance of getting a Dreadnought in now. I do believe there is an Annul in Simon's hand, but I'm pretty sure there's some amount of counter magic in Isaac's hand that can deal with that. Alright, no enabler for the Dreadnought though, so misdirection has been pitched here. I think that was a Chain of Vapor drawn by Simon, which is going to be very good at answering a Dreadnought as well. I'm not sure how this game is actually going to pan out. It feels relatively evenly poised of both players, just with a grip full of blue cards, although Simon is getting a slight bit of damage in every turn. Okay, so we've got a Chain of Vapor on the powder keg on 2. So this is one of the reasons why playing out the second keg is good. I don't understand why it wasn't ticked up to 2 though. Unless it was just trying to not get ruined by a potential hunting pack dupe. But I don't know how there's going to be green mana on Simon's side to make like a hunting pack off of a Cunning Wish. Alright, we're playing out the second keg again. Alright, it's the end of the turn and we're seeing the mana short. Alright, that's a very quick counter spell in reply, because the mana short will just cut a lot of interaction out here. Alright, the counter spell is good. And I think that's going to be the end of Isaac's turn. We're going to go back to Simon. He's going to untap his little 1-1. And we're going to continue to send in these powerful fairy beats. 17 life now. Apologies for the glare on the life turtle up there. Okay, we've got a Sapphire Medallion. There is no powder keg on 2 that can pop this, so this is a really good spot for Simon just to unload everything and try and win the game. We do know that Isaac's got a grip full of cards. I think there was 2 Dreadnoughts in there though, which isn't really what he wants in this situation. He needs the ability to try and interact. That's kind of what this turn is going to be all about. We're beginning with a Merchant Scroll. This can certainly find relevant pieces. Looked like Isaac thought about firing off a counterspell here and decided not to. Also, Isaac's posture here isn't one that speaks volumes of confidence in how this turn is going to pan out, I would say. But maybe that's just a really nice bluff and they've just got a grip full of counter magic. Okay, a misdirection has been found. So the reason for misdirection here is what you can do with misdirection is if your opponent tries to counter your spell, you can misdirect that counter spell to the misdirection itself. So it's effectively a force of will for counter spells. And that's the reason for grabbing it here. To try and resolve like a bunch of spells. And I think the Meditate is probably like the big prize, whether the fight is going to be here. And we'll see if the fight is good enough on Isaac's side, or if he's just going to get milled out this turn. This Cloud of Fairies are going to net 1 mana. And we have a storm count of 3 so far, which is indicated by the dice in the top right-hand corner of your picture. We've got another 2 mana being tapped here. Is this just another Cloud of Fairies? We're just generating storm. Oh, sorry, it's the Meditate, isn't it? 'Cause it's 2 mana because of the -1. This is going to be a counter spell, which is probably going to meet the misdirection. This is the fight that I was talking about that was probably going to happen. This is likely to be like the hit of the whole game here, if this meditate resolves or not. I think it's probably going to be the annul that gets pitched to this misdirection, because the annul is not really what you want now. You just want to be able to try and win the game. Yep, that's the annul being pitched to the misdirection. So the misdirection is going to attempt to misdirect the counterspell to the misdirect itself, because the misdirect is still on the stack while it's resolving. Okay, we're seeing a gush here, just a classic stack here. We've got 4 items on the stack so far, and I think we're probably going to see a 5th one. I can't quite make out the last card in Simon's hand here. I know there's a frantic search, but I can't work out the last one. Is that a second meditate? Okay, so it could be meditate over the top here. So we've got the gush drawing 2 cards. Are we going to see another fight here? Counterspell is off, but things like foil are on. Daze is not really going to work with this amount of mana in play. It is indeed a foil pitching an island, and I couldn't see what the other card is. Okay, there it is. An island and a daze. Yep, but I don't really like the daze in this spot, so that makes some sense. Although there's an argument to just keep anything that does anything here. But I think the daze is unlikely to do stuff. The pinch points here are quite tight, and it looks like daze is being played over. Okay, so we've got another foil on this frantic search. That is probably going to collapse this entire house of cards. So yeah, all the counter magic on the Dreadnought side of things works. And now I think Simon is left with 2 power in play and a meditate in hand, which is not a bad reload. But giving the Dreadnought player an extra turn could be a bit sketchy. The powder keg now goes up to 2, so it gets to blow up everything. This is a bad situation for Simon to be in. A classic mono-blue battle of many counterspells and misdirects, but was won by the Dreadnought player there. But he still needs to actually assemble his combo and beat down. We could just end up in a situation where we just play draw go for like 7 turns. All of a sudden, Simon's got a full hand and can send it again. Because without the actual combo piece to go with the Dreadnought, you can't apply any pressure. We haven't seen any Mistress Factories. A lot of the Dreadnought builds are going off of Mistress Factory and just playing 17 islands at the moment. There are still some that go 18 lands with 16 islands and 2 factories. I prefer just the straight up only islands build myself. But both are obviously viable and doing quite well. Oh, we're cracking the keg. This is the awkward thing of the keg killing the other keg. But it is what it is sometimes. Are we going to see any sort of meditate? If you do cast a meditate from Simon's side, you want to cast it in your opponent's end step, so that they don't know they're getting the extra turn and aren't prepared for it. Yep, so that's what we're seeing here. We've got a meditate. This is going to allow Isaac to untap and have another turn, but it's going to refill Simon's hand with 4 new cards. Right, okay, it's a gush. It felt like a float 2 sort of tapping, not a casting a spell kind of tapping. So we've got a gush going here. Is it going to be able to interact with the meditate or not? We've got an impulse using the 2 mana that was floating. Looks like maybe another impulse there and a daze. I think the impulse was what was taken here. We might be seeing another impulse hit the stack. Okay, the meditate has resolved. This is now going to be another turn for Isaac to see if he can actually assemble his combo and put the pressure in. There's also, if this game just goes long, it's quite easy to just do a small brain freeze and it'd be lethal. Because we have seen a lot of cards from both sides. Those decks are looking mighty thin. Alright, we're back to Isaac having another turn. Surely he has to go for something that pressures his opponent this turn. If you have the Dreadnought combo, I think you need to send it now. 2 mana, Impulse. This is a good way of finding the missing piece, but it does bring you ever closer to getting killed by just a natural brain freeze. Alright, we got 1 mana being tapped. Is it Dreadnought time? It is Dreadnought time. There is an annul. Is there any reaction to this? I believe Isaac's got a second Dreadnought, so probably just let this go. Play the second Dreadnought. Yeah, okay. Here we go. And then cast the Enabler this way. There's a lot of spells that have been cast. I think we might just see a small brain freeze this turn, though. So here is the Vision Charm. So Storm count is, what, 1, 2, 3, 4? So a brain freeze here would mill 15. Okay, so we're going to see it mill 18, which might be enough, to be honest. So it's going to untap some lands, get a little bit more Storm going. Another instant would have been really handy here, but alas was not to be the case with Simon. I don't think there's any Flash of Insight in there, which is a card that you could try and fire off here. Alright, we got some looks into the old graveyard here. Just calculating the amount of spells that have been cast. Because we had an impulse as well, I think, this turn. Brain freeze. So we got how many spells over here? 2 spells plus the brain freeze. That's 3 on this end, and then we have 2 dreadnoughts, 4, 5, vision charm 6. So that is the entire library. Yep. All right. Storm managed to find a way. I don't think we're going to see much changes in their sideboarding ahead of game 3, so our players just going to shuffle up, and we're going to get right into the final game of this round. Right, our players are now drawing their opening hands. We see like a Sapphire Medallion, Merchant Scroll, Cloud of Fairies, so reasonable stuff over on Simon's side of things. I can't quite make out what Isaac's working with here. That looks like a turn 2 Dreadnought with foil backup. This game could be a very quick one. I don't think there's an annul in Simon's hand either. Alright, here comes the island. When your Dreadnought opponent keeps a hand and then just plays an island and doesn't play anything that turn, that kind of suggests they're going to be doing Dreadnought on turn 2 more often than not. Because if they're not having to portent for it, they just kept their hand with no 1-drop so they could just pop off with this Dreadnought. Okay, we've got a Dreadnought in play and a Sapphire Medallion. Is that something that wants to be fought over from Isaac's side of things? I believe there is a foil over there. Alright, we're going to see a Gush. This is going to give them plenty of food for the foil. Maybe see if they find another counter spell so they can happily fire this one off. Alright, there is the foil. We're going to go back to Isaac. 12 life is going to be lost by Simon. There is no ability to cast that counter spell, but I think there's a misdirection in the hand of Isaac here, which isn't the perfect counterspell for this, because it's not going to be able to redirect a snap or anything. Alright, that was just the game. Sometimes the Dreadnought comes along and smashes people up. Alright, that is the end of round 1, taken down by Isaac, 2 and 1, playing Dreadnought. Alright, we're into round 2 now. On the left we have Dario, and on the right we have me. I was table 1, so you get to watch me play, so I get a little bit more extra insight to you lovely people in terms of what I'm thinking as some of these decisions are being made. On the left, Dario is playing Mono Blue Stiflenor, and I am playing good old-fashioned Jund. Right, we are drawing our opening hands here. My opening hand has a Duress, but not really enough mana to work, so we're going for a mulligan here. I think Dario is keeping his hand. That's my second hand. We've got a Cabal Therapy in there. Alright, Dario leads us off with a Portent. Let's see what we can see from this Portent pile. I obviously know what's coming, but here we go. Looks like there's a Dreadnought among those cards. And Dario's keeping the Portent pile, and then we draw a card in his upkeep, and it's over to me. So I've drawn a Duress, which is obviously a great find. I have to imagine that this is a Dreadnought matchup just off of the basis of what we're seeing so far, so I Duress my opponent. We have a look at the hand. 2 Vision Charms and a Powder Keg. So there's no way that we can stop them from having Dreadnought if Dreadnought is on top of their library. And we know we've got this Cabal Therapy in hand, so the only correct play here for us is to take the Powder Keg and then hope they don't have Dreadnought exactly on top, and then we can Cabal Therapy them next turn and strip both of the Vision Charms. That is the plan we're hoping for, at least. Right, Dario untaps here and draws that Dreadnought that he carefully hid on top. So we're going to see the Dreadnought, we're going to see the Vision Charm, the Dreadnought phases out, and it goes over to me. So I've got some choices here. What I need to do, I think, I don't really have anything that interacts with the Dreadnought, so I need to draw something next turn. I need to make sure it works. So we're going to play this Curse Scroll, because we have perfect information of our opponent's hand at this point. It doesn't really matter what we're doing with our pieces. And then we're going to Cabal Therapy our opponent here. We're going to get rid of that Vision Charm that we know about and just leave them with lands. This means that if we find a Terminate off the top, we can kill the Dreadnought and they won't be able to phase it out. However, are we going to find it is the next question. Dario here is going to turn his guy sideways and put us down to 8 life. Unfortunately, I did not actually click the life total at the bottom. Apologies for that. But I didn't draw the Terminate, and then we're just going to get hit for 12 again and die. So not really a great start for this match for us. If we're on the play, then that hand is great, and we managed to beat them, but we weren't on the play. So what we want for this matchup out of our sideboard, from my side of things, is I'm putting in Naturalizes and Red Blasts and the one of Cabal Therapy in my sideboard, as you can see here. And we're just going to take out a bunch of red cards like Lightning Bolts and the Grim Lavamancer that don't really do very much. In terms of Dario's side of things, there could be an annul there in anticipation of the Sylvan Libraries. There's probably going to be some amount of blue blast to deal with our red blasts, and that's probably going to be it. Alright, we're drawing opening hands now. My hand looks like it's got red blast and a duress, maybe some other bits and pieces. That seems like a pretty reasonable selection of cards. I think Dario is going back for a mulligan here, so he's going to be starting the game on at least 6 cards. Or at most 6 cards, I should say. Right, Dario's checking out his second hand. What have we got here for him? Keeper. Feels like as a keeper, and he's just going to put one back here. Alright, I'm leading off with Sulphurous Springs into Duress. We get to have a nice look at the hand. There is a nice mixture of things. So we've got the Portent, Counterspell, Impulse, and Stifle. So there's 2 different schools of thoughts here. You can try and take out the Counterspell to make additional things resolve on your side of the game. You can take out the Stifle, so they're going to have to find both halves of their combo. It also depends what's in my hand, depending on what decision I make here. I think there's a Ravenous Rats and another Duress in there, as well as a Ravenous Baloth for later on. So I'm probably thinking between either Portent or Stifle here, most likely. And we go for the Stifle. Just make it so it's going to take them longer to get the combo going, because we are an attrition deck, so we can play that long attrition game much better than the Dreadnought player. So we see an Island Portent from Dario here. Alright, Dario's keeping it and drawing off the Portent. Now it's my turn. Looks like we've got another Pain land of a different variety there. I think it's Llanowar Wastes. So we have options here. We can get like the Ravenous Rats in. We can try and play a Cabal Therapy or a Duress. It just depends on how mana efficient we want to be with this turn. So we're going for this Llanowar Wastes. And we're going to fire in with another Duress. Alright, so we have a Gush, a Portent, a Counterspell, and the Impulse. So the only thing added to this hand is the Gush. We immediately take the Gush because this is a resource attrition-based matchup. And Jund is very, very good at attritioning the Dreadnought deck. So making sure they don't have the combo to like bap us, and then we just take their 2-for-1s because we don't want them to draw extra cards. That makes a lot of sense here. So now we have an answer for Dreadnought in hand, which is always nice to see. Now we can start getting some rat action going. So I believe we're going to be playing a Ravenous Rats this turn. Yep, this is going to shred our opponent's hand of another card. And because we've got pretty good information about what our opponent has, it's going to give us more information about what's left in hand. And this is just how the Jund matchup plays out on this side. We just keep throwing in hand disruption and stuff. So there was a foil pitched that turn. The foil is obviously a massive card disadvantage for our opponent. They can't afford that. So we get to blank stuff like foil just by the nature of having so much discard in our deck. A little aside, Ravenous Rats is one of the cards that when I first started playing Premodern, I thought, why is this card in decks? You know, it doesn't look very good. And then the more you play with it, the more you realise it's actually just really, really good. And it's the backbone of several different decks in the format, actually. Okay, so it's back over to Dario here. We're seeing a Portent, so there is more Sculpting Ahoy. Are we going to be keeping these 3, or are they getting shuffled? He must be trying to assemble the combo and just hoping we don't have ways of destroying their Dreadnought. Alright, leaving them on top. So untap and draw. So we've got a pain-free mana source in hand. We obviously have to take a pain from the cracking of the fetch, but then we actually get just to not have to keep spending all this life into Llanowar Waste and Sulphurous Springs. So this time I could have played a Ravenous Baloth, but I'm just holding back with the Red Elemental Blast to make sure that nothing goes wrong. Just having as many ways of interacting with Dreadnought is all we need. So it's over to me again. We're going to crack in for 1 with the Ravenous Rats, doing some work. I don't know how much damage I dealt with Ravenous Rats in this tournament, but it was a lot. And now we can get a Tempting Worm in, I think. This gives us the ability to still hold up the Red Blast. Tempting Worm is very, very good against the Dreadnought decks. Because if they don't have the Dreadnought combo, they maybe put in a land, and then you get this 5-5, and they're really bad at answering pressure. Right, so we've got a Counterspell on the Worm. So I can react with this with the Red Blast if I want to, or I can just let this go. We've got another threat in hand. We're already chipping in for a little bit. I just want to make sure that I'm ticking all the boxes so that we don't get killed by any sort of Dreadnought action. And having 2 answers to Dreadnought in the form of Red Blast and the Terminate is what we need. I've drawn a land here. This is going to allow us to get a creature into play while still holding up the Red Blast. We will be playing slightly into days if we do it this way, but I think that's fine because we need to get this game won. So we're probably just going to start applying the pressure with this Baloth. Right, so we're going to crack this Wooded Foothills. Let's go digging for, I think this is a forest on this one, and then the other one gets us the mountain so that we can hold up Pyroblast. And I decided to crack them both now because our opponent does have access to Stifles in their deck. If the first one resolved, we may as well get the other one. Obviously using beautiful Onslaught basics. The best basics. Okay, so we're going to leave up this mountain for a very obvious red blast, but then we're just going to deploy this Ravenous Baloth. This gives us a nice beater. So instead of doing just 1 damage, we can start cracking in for 5 a turn, and that's going to ramp up very quickly and reduce our opponent's amount of time left in this game before they need to find something else. All right, they're going for a foil on our Ravenous Baloth. Again, that's fine. We're just playing an attrition game. They just pitched 3 cards after we've hit them with 3 discard spells already. So they are so far behind on this one. One of the cards they pitched was a Flash of Insight, though. So they do get to dig quite deeply with this. I could Red Blast this, but I think, again, we just want to fight over the Dreadnought and make sure that our Terminate resolves. 5, 6, 7, 8. I think it was 8 cards. Yeah, so it's a Flash of Insight for 8. I think just looking for ways of assembling the Dreadnought combo, because obviously it still will be the biggest thing on board and do a lot of work if they can get it down. Obviously, the 2 cards left in my hand are just answers to Dreadnought. We've got other creatures in our deck we can draw. I'm not worried about that. Our deck is a lot more threat dense than our opponent's deck. All right, so here comes the Dreadnought. So we let this one in, and then there's a Stifle. So we have 2 choices here. We can either Red Blast this right now, or we can hold up the Red Blast for our turn. So what we're doing is we're getting the Vision Charm because it's our opponent's last card in hand. So they phase this out. This means that doing it this way, we get to attack for 1 this turn, and then just terminate in their upkeep. So we get in for 1. I don't know if we have any other follow-up here as well. Did we draw a threat? We did not. But in the upkeep, we just get to terminate this. Having a nice removal spell that just says destroy creature is always nice to have. Then it's back over to Dario here. And we're seeing a Portent. This little Ravenous Rat's just constantly chipping away. Our opponent have to assemble the entire combo again. And they also have to be wary of what we can deploy here. We have things like Call of the Herds that we might be finding soon that can add some pressure to the board. All right. Once again, the Ravenous Rats chips in. I think I missed a point of damage on the life counter at the bottom. Apologies for that. You think I know better since I'm recording the coverage to then narrate to later, but here we are. All right, Dario's got a play this turn. It's a Powder Keg. Sure. That's probably going to be fine for what we're trying to do on our side. If they burn it on a Ravenous Rats, that's not really a problem for us. This Ravenous Rats has now dealt 6 points of damage. I can't really see what I've got in hand. I think there's a Diabolic Edict in there. Alright, a Cephalid Colosseum is an interesting one. You don't often see that out of the Dreadnought deck, but Dario's got it there so he can filter when he's bouncing all these lands with Gushes and stuff later on. That feels like a really good play to have access to. I've got a Phyrexian Furnace, which is going to slowly make it so that this Colosseum doesn't get to activate. Looks like I've got a Naturalize in hand as well. I think it's Naturalize Diabolic Edict. So we've got the next Dreadnought completely covered, and we're just going to slowly chip in with the Ravenous Rats. And then at some point, we'll find something else. This Powder Keg ticking up means that if we draw something like a Call of the Herd, we can deploy it now, and they won't be able to kill our elephants. This is just a case of getting the game over and done with, I think. The game has pretty much already been won by this stage. This is just what Jund does to a person. Just passing it back to our opponent. They go up to 2 with the Powder Keg. And there is a Portent from our opponent. Have they found what they need? I don't know if this gives them the ability to crack the Colosseum soon, but it might do. Right, looks like they're keeping off that Portent and passing it over. I'm just reminding my opponent to take their Portent draw. Okay. So we've got a Tempting Worm in our hand as well. So I'm going to chip in with the Rats. 9 damage this Ravenous Rats has dealt. Now we have some choices to make. If we want to get this Tempting Worm in, we can blow up this Powder Keg that our opponent has. They'll pop it on to blow up the Rats, and then we get to deploy the Tempting Worm and just try and close this game. If we've got other answers to Dreadnought in hand, that's probably a perfectly fine place to be, because Dreadnought is quite a resource-intensive threat, because it takes 2 cards to even establish, and that means our opponent would just have 1 card left, which means we could play around a bunch of things that our opponent has access to. So they pop it on 2 to kill the Rats, and now we get to play a land and jam in this Tempting Worm, holding up the Diabolic Edict. Just reminding my opponent they can put in as many things as they want. Any number of lands, creatures, artifacts, or enchantments. They get an island in. It's kind of interesting that they would do that when they have the Cephalid Colosseum, because if they can get enough stuff in their bin, they can cycle this island. Alright. Looks like Dario's in a bit of trouble here. I'm just trying to work out how to get through this game with this giant worm staring them down. Obviously, their threat is going to be bigger if they can find it. They have to be able to not only find it when they've only got 4 dreadnoughts in their deck, 3 now because we killed one, but they also have to find the blue card to go with it, and then also protection. So it's a big ask for them to thread together 3 cards in the face of a 5/5 beta. I do love a bit of Jund. Alright, we're passing back to me. Going to send in for 5. That's going to put our opponent down to 6. And then looks like we have a Call of the Herd in hand. Just exile one of the cards from our opponent's graveyard. Here comes an elephant. I haven't quite finished making my elephant tokens just yet. So we just have to see a little bit of advertising for me, I'm afraid. And then I have the choice to flash back a Call of the Herd to guarantee lethal if they bounce our Tempting Worm. Or I can just hold mana up so we've got Diabolic Edict around a Daze as an option. Or cracking the Phyrexian Furnace and Diabolic Edict. A bunch of different things. We don't need to keep adding stuff to the board. We've got plenty of pressure here. Okay, so here comes a Gush. This is going to get Dario deeper into the deck. Possibly give them enough stuff to get this Cephalid Colosseum going. I've got a peek. There's my Diabolic Edict and a nice little forest. So I get to draw a card. What are they able to string together here? I think they have a Pyroblast or Blue Blast in hand. So it's not going to take much to get this Cephalid Colosseum up and running. But the Blue Blast isn't going to be an effective defense against this Diabolic Edict, even if they can assemble the combo. Right, so they're Vision Charming themselves for the mill. This is one of the lesser known options. This is going to give them the ability to activate the Cephalid Colosseum. I'm just letting them know that the milled cards go in the graveyard before the Vision Charm does. For the purposes of Phyrexian Furnace, you need to maintain your graveyard order. The spell does its things and then is put into the graveyard when it resolves. So now we're going to see this Cephalid Colosseum activate and draw Dario 3 cards, which he's then going to select 3 cards from their hand to discard. Is this going to be enough? Or do I get to have a game 3 into our opponent? Alright, our opponent has just scooped it up there and we're going to game 3. A pretty decisive victory for Jund there. This is just what Jund does. Jund is such a strong resource denial deck in these sort of blue matchups. Ravenous Rats is just really powerful. Alright, let's shuffle up and go to game number 3. Alright, looks like we're keeping open hands. I believe I've kept 7 here and Dario's going to 6 on the play. Here is an island. I'm probably going to lead off with some sort of hand disruption. I run 8 pieces, so I would imagine that's what I'm going to be focusing on doing here. Looks like there's a Ravenous Rats, a Duress, a Pyroblast. I can't make out the rest of the cards here. That's not a bad opening hand against the Dreadnought matchup. Alright, I decided to not play the Duress this turn and just hold up the potential Red Blast. And then we go to turn number 2. We just had a pass from Dario. Now I get to deploy a Swamp. And this is probably going to be time for hand disruption. This is also playing around Daze to make sure that we can convert it more easily. Or we at least get a proper card like a counterspell, whereas Daze is like diminishing returns. So here we have the option again. Immediately I take the Gush here because Gush is just not a card that I want my opponent to have here, because we don't want them to gain more resources, because our game plan here is to deny our opponent's resources, make their cards like foil feel like impossible to use. Our opponent has the ability to set up a Dreadnought. What we're doing now is we're fetching whilst our opponent doesn't have a Stifle, because we're going to be getting a mountain anyway. We may as well play around the potential Stifle. We don't want to get cut off of mana sources, because that's one way they could interact with us having Pyroblast, is just to stop our fetches so we never get the red mana for it in the first place. So if this Impulse finds one half of the combo and their draw step finds the other half, they could assemble a Dreadnought this turn, which is why we're holding up this mountain. But we know that if they do assemble the Dreadnought, they're not going to have any counterspell backup for it, because they're going to have no like dazes, because we're going to have perfect information, because the 2 cards they would play to make the Dreadnought would be the one they got for the Impulse and the one they got for turn. So all the information we just got with that Duress would still be accurate. Okay, it looks like it's back over to me. I think we're going to see potentially some rats there. We've also assembled what I like to call Juntron of Mountain Swamp Forest. Here comes the Ravenous Rats, more and more attacking our opponent's hand, just chipping away those resources. We're going to see an Impulse in response, getting a better idea of what is going to be valuable in their hand before they go to discard. I think there was a Dreadnought in that pile of cards, which is certainly getting towards where they want to be. Thinking hard about this Impulse. 4 cards is a lot of information to process in one go, especially when you're trying to build multi-turn lines. All right, they've made their choice. And then the Ravenous Rats trigger is going to discard an island. Apologies for the glare here. Nothing else there. And it's back to me again. Okay, we've just drawn a Dreadnought answer that we can protect with a Pyroblast. So we're feeling very good here. We've got some options. It looks like we're going for another Rats. Just such an annoying card because it's not really worth interacting with a lot of the time. But just squeezing out those resources can be a real problem. This is a moment I think very, very carefully about. The Gush, when I have a Pyroblast. This is obviously a massively telegraphed Pyroblast or a very good bluff, I guess, from my part. But like I said, we need to be playing this attrition battle. But are we going after the Gush here, or are we just trying to make sure that the Dreadnought dies when we try and naturalize it later on? So the Gush has finished resolving. The Ravenous Rats trigger is still on the stack. What is getting discarded here? Looks like it's an island being discarded to the Rats. And then I play my land for turn, which is a Treetop Village, which gives us a threat that we don't have to worry about counter magic for. It also can't be Chain of Vapored if our opponent's doing that sort of stuff. All right, just a portent from our opponent. Okay, they are leaving the cards on top, so Dario likes what they're seeing over here. It's back over to me again. We've got another land, which just means that we can just keep deploying stuff, like getting some threats whilst holding up interaction, which is a nice place to be. We've now got 2 Rats ready to chip in. They did 9 damage in game 1, or sorry, that was in game 2. And now they've already done 1 damage here, so we're going to go up to 12 damage from Ravenous Rats in 2 games in this next turn, which is kind of wild. Let's get in. And then it's time for Elephants. So this is going to give us a much bigger clock. And if our opponent interacts with this, like with a counterspell, they're counterspelling half of our card. Because we've still got the flashback for later. Which is why Call of the Herd is just so good in these sort of grindy matchups. Just so much like hidden card advantage in the Jund deck. I really do enjoy it a great deal, which is why I've been working so hard on it. And I do have a guide to it on my Patreon. I'm going to update that guide with this current list that I'm playing as well. All right, just back over to me. A second Red Blast makes me feel pretty safe. Let's just get in for 2 more. That's 14 damage we've dealt with Rats. Now we're going to flashback this Call of the Herd. We already got a counter spell off the front side. Do we get anything off the back side, or are we just getting an Elephant? We're just getting an Elephant. So that gives us 5 damage. That's a 3-turn clock. You see an Impulse from Dario at our end step here. I think there is a Phyrexian Dreadnought amongst those cards. But we do have the double Red Blast available, which is going to be incredibly useful to stop pretty much anything Dario is doing. All right, they've made their selection. Are we going to see the Dreadnought this turn? We've got a little bit of thinking to be done here to work out if that's what Dario wants to do, or if they can afford to take another point of damage. All right, we're seeing a Powder Keg here. So the Powder Keg can just take out our Elephant because it has a mana value of 0, but that's okay. Just get in for 5. Okay, they're just going to pop the keg straight away, just buy some time. But that's 16 damage Ravenous Rats has dealt in 2 games. What a beater. Alright, so now it's time for a Tempting Worm, and we can back it up with Red Blast if we want to. We've also got this Treetop Village, which can turn sideways soon as well. Does our opponent want to interact with this? They're just asking me how many cards I've got in hand. So if they have a Dreadnought, they can put the Dreadnought into play off of this and then Stifle it or Vision Charm it. That is a possibility. But that's not going to be great into the double Red Blast that I'm packing, whilst I also have protection around Daze by having 2 spare mana on top of that. And there's also a Naturalize in my hand. Right, they didn't put anything in off the Tempting Worm. It's just a 2-mana 5/5. It's Tarmogoyf at home, I guess. Let's have a look what Dario wants to do this turn. Okay, it's time for Dreadnought. This is the Vision Charm. I will use a Red Blast on a Vision Charm here because I want the Dreadnought to be in play. So I want them to use a Stifle if they have it. Okay, so they're Red Blasting this. This is going to get rid of our Red Blast. Now we can decide what we're doing. They've got 3 cards in hand here. So am I firing off this Red Blast right now to protect our existing Red Blast or to get rid of this Vision Charm, or do we just let it go? So what we're going to do now instead is, with the Vision Charm still on the stack, we're going to naturalize this Dreadnought whilst holding up this Red Blast. Because now they can't protect the Dreadnought, it has to be a counterspell. Alright, so the Dreadnought is gone. That seems like a very, very bad situation for our opponent here. Just classic Jund into Dreadnought sort of things. So we activate Treetop Village and we swing in for what, 8, 9, 10 here. So our opponent, even if they make a Dreadnought now, is not going to be good enough, which means we can just deploy another guy, because they're not going to be able to like wrath our board or anything. Right, they're discarding what looks like a Daze, I think that was. All right, here comes an Impulse from Dario. I think we're getting to the end of this one, really. When Phyrexian Dreadnought isn't good enough, you know you're in trouble. All right, they selected one of the cards off his Impulse. Is there any more doing, or is this the end of this one? All right, there's a Gush. We're digging deeper. I'm not sure what they're going to be able to cast at the end of this. I'm thinking about Red Blasting this one. I don't even know if I have a Red Blast, actually. I'm representing one. I can't remember if we have one at that point. No, we definitely do, don't we? We definitely have the second Red Blast. We didn't fire it off earlier. And then that is the handshake, and that is the game for Jund. Yep, Jund is very strong against Dreadnought. And you got to see me having a good time with it. All right, on to the next round. We are into round 3, and once again, it is me on camera. I am on the left, and my friend Chris is on the right. I'm obviously still playing Jund, and Chris is on Enchantress. Right, we've got opening hands. I believe Chris is on the play here. I do know what the matchup is, not that it's necessarily going to help me a bunch here. It does mean that I get to Cabal Therapy knowing what my opponent's deck is, though, which is pretty cool. It looks like Chris is going to a mulligan to 6 here. Chris is keeping on 6, and he's ready to lead us off. Just a forest. So it's over to me. And then we're going to be cracking a Bloodstained Mire here. Looking for a Swamp and Cabal Therapying. I believe I name our go through an Enchantress here. And we managed to hit as well. This matchup pre-board isn't great for Jund. But you get a lot of tools post-board. Snagging the early enabler for all their card draw is really important though. Chris just wants to try and find an engine and set it up. So we've got a Miri's Guile over there, which is going to help him dig into the pieces he needs to get going. Seeing a Rift Groves bounce back. There's a Sterling Grove, a Parallax Wave, and a Serra Sanctum in hand. It's over to me, and I've drawn a third Lightning Bolt in a matchup where the card is really bad. So we're just going to start taxing our opponent's hand a little bit here. We're going to be making Chris discard a card. Looks like he's going for the Forest. The Miri's Guile means that the... Okay, we're also flashing back the Cabal Therapy here to take the Sterling Grove, because that's just a way of finding a answer, as well as shuffling the library from the Miri's Guile. So if our opponent finds the... Sorry, when I say answer, I mean a card draw effect, like Enchantress's Presence, or they can find answers in the form of Parallax Waves if we manage to get rid of this one. It just gives him so much utility, which is why it gets taken here. All right, Chris is deploying the Serra Sanctum and just passing the turn. It's over back to me. I've got a Phyrexian Furnace, which is very good at dealing with our opponent's replenish. They have sometimes 1 or 2 in the main. My hand with all these lightning bolts is not great, and I don't have green mana at present either, so things are a little bit awkward for me. But we at least managed to take away our opponent's draw engine at the start, and now it's just a case of getting into the game with some threats and keeping it going. So there's a Sterling Grove. We already got rid of one of those earlier. This is a route to an Enchantress's Presence that is just a little bit slower. So we're just going to Lightning Bolt our opponent's face because we know the Lightning Bolts don't do anything here. Alright, back to some more Junding action. We finally found a green source, which is great news. This allows this Sylvan Library to come into play and help us dig towards some more hand disruption and ways of actually clocking our opponent, which is what we're really missing at the moment. If you don't apply pressure to the Enchantress deck, it will eventually kill you. Right, Miri's Guile is still continuing to fix the top of Chris's library here. I think there's an Elephant Grass among other pieces there. We don't really have any threats at the moment, so there's no point getting the Elephant Grass. What Chris probably wants to find is a fetch land at some point to shuffle and see 3 new cards of the Miri's Guile, because when you're just seeing 1 extra card every turn, but we already know what 2 of them are, it ends up being the same, more or less. Okay, so I'll go through the Enchantress. Obviously bad news for us on the old Jund side of things. Alright, Chris is passing by. I'm just going to Lightning Bolt him up in the face again. And then it's time for Sylvan Library. It finds Fetch Land and Sylvan Library. So not really a great selection of cards here. We're looking for threats. The mana does allow us to play a Ravenous Baloth at some point, but it's going to be a little bit slow on that front. So exile the bottom card of Chris's graveyard. And it's time to shuffle the library and deploy this Obstinate Baloth, taking another point of pain off of this Llanowar Wastes. And now there's actually a clock in play, and we've still got another Lightning Bolt. So Chris is effectively on 11, but doesn't know it yet. So 3 hits from this Baloth will be lethal. But now he's probably going to be drawing multiple cards a turn because of the Argothian Enchantress just digging really deeply into the deck. When the majority of spells you're casting also draw you a free card. it can certainly start snowballing out of control very quickly. And I think from the Jund side of things, it just was too slow here. This is quite a late in the day Ravenous Baloth. All that disruption may have slowed Chris down, but because there was no pressure, it didn't really make enough of a difference. Because 14 life is still pretty comfortable. Alright, there's an Enchantress Presence. So every single enchantment that Chris casts from this point on is going to draw 2 cards. So now we've got a Sylvan Library being activated here. The Diabolic Edict is certainly a useful one. I am just taking all of the cards here. Our life total is probably not the most important things. Now, they can be kind of aggressive every now and then with like an Opalescence out of nowhere and start bashing. That's not generally how the Enchantress tends to play most of the time. Alright, so the Diabolic Edict answers the go to Enchantress. 4 damage comes across to put Chris down to 10 life. A Ravenous Rat takes another bite out of Chris's hand and puts us down to 7 on the Jund side of things. And then we also get to deploy a land here, I think. Okay, so the Swords to Plowshares went away via the Ravenous Rats, and now there is a Treetop Village. So the Treetop Village plus a Baloth is lethal next turn. So Chris does have to find something here. Now a Parallax Wave can just shut down our aggro plan quite handily. And we know that there is a Parallax Wave in Chris's hand. So we're kind of just one turn too slow. If we were a turn quicker getting the Baloth down here, we could have put our opponent into lethal range of a Lightning Bolt. It looks like the wave is going to be coming down this turn that we saw all the way back in turn 1. Expiration from Chris. This draws 2 cards. One from the... Oh, sorry, it only draws 1 because the Argetic Enchantress died, didn't it? So that puts Chris down to 9. That's still quite far away from getting Lightning Bolted, though. There are now 4 enchantments, so Serra's Sanctum is tapping for 4, so it can play an Opalescence or a Parallax Wave. Obviously, Wave is very good on this board, just shredding all of our creatures. Means that the Treetop Village won't be able to attack either. Seems quite likely that's going to be what Chris plays, unless he's got something else he wants to deploy first. Elephant Grass, so this will cost 2 mana to make non-black creatures to attack. And black creatures just can't attack. I think that other card is the Parallax Wave here. And then we're just going to see the counters on it. Apologies for the glare here. So this could just answer all of our creatures. And it doesn't feel like Jund got off to a good enough start here to get it going. Just needed a little bit more pressure. Right, the pass back from Chris. And now it's going to be my turn playing the Jund. We've got the Sylvan Library. Tempting Worm is a bit of a sketchy one in this matchup at times. Because sometimes you put it into play and your opponent just dumps everything. And then you're in trouble. There is the possibility of paying 4 life here to get a little Cabal Therapy off first. The issue is the Parallax Wave means that any creatures just don't really matter. So it's a case of, do you want to try and overload the wave and get through it that way? Or do you want to just wait it out? But waiting out is so bad when your opponent's drawing additional cards every turn. It's a real risky proposition. I think at this moment, I was thinking, I've lost this game. And we just need to maybe try and get through as many cards as possible so we got more chances of hitting a Lightning Bolt. But we're still going to be shy of 3 damage, so it's just not going to be enough here. Alright, the library is finished resolving. I decided to take 1 card in the end. I believe that's the Cabal Therapy. Alright, so I decided to pay for the Elephant Grass to attack. And then in response to the Parallax Wave killing my Ravenous Baloth, I sacrifice it for 4 life, because 4 life is an additional card off of a Sylvan Library, so it's probably worth it. And I don't think we're going to win by the time the Parallax Wave runs its course. I also use the Ravenous Rats to take the other card that our opponent had, which was a Wild Growth. So our opponent is playing off the top, but they do have this Parallax Wave and this Elephant Grass. They can also stack the Cumulative Upkeep and the Mirror's Guile, so they know what the 3 cards that they're going to be looking at this turn are before they decide if they want to pay for the Elephant Grass, because that can keep our Treetop Village at bay if we don't find another land. Right, here Chris goes looking at the top 3 with the Mirror's Guile. There's also a free shuffle over there using this Sterling Grove, so he can just put an Opalescence on top here, play the Opalescence, and then we're never getting creatures again. And we know we only have 6 points of burn total, so we have to connect with creatures. So there's no way that we'll be able to overcome 9 life if our opponent does put a Opalescence into play this turn. There's no naturalizers in the main deck of this Jund list I was playing. Right, Chris has finished doing his Mary's Gull. He's letting the Elephant Grass go, cracking the Sterling Grove. This is going to put, must be the Opalescence here, right? Yeah, there's the Opalescence. The Serra Sanctum taps for 4, which is going to be enough to put this Opalescence in, and that's just going to be able to reset the Parallax Wave, because the Parallax Wave becomes a creature, so it can target itself. When it targets itself, it blinks and comes back with a full number of counters. And then you can do that and exile any number of creatures you want along the way by exiling them, and then response exiling yourself, so the leave trigger happens before the exile trigger does. So they're exiled permanently. And now Chris can also start turning guys sideways. So what Chris does here is quite a good play. He exiles the Sylvan Library, just normally, not like permanently. He's just going to put it under their wave for now so that he can attack and I don't get to block. So then the wave, the Expiration, the Enchantress Presence, and the Miri's Guile all come in for a bunch of damage here. And then in the second main phase, he can then blink the Parallax Wave, which gives me my Sylvan Library back, but then he can target it and then target the Parallax Wave in response. And this is just going to be me dead here, I think. I'm just going to try and draw an extra card with this Refracting Furnace to see if we can get anywhere. Nice little Lightning Bolt. We put our opponent to 6, but then we just don't have the burn to reach like the damage we need. And then we're going to have to scoot that one up and go to game 2. In terms of sideboarding, I get some pretty good stuff on the Jund side of things here. We have access to Tranquil Domain. We have the Engineered Plague, which can deal with the Enchantress. We also have some Naturalizers and another Cabal Therapy. So we've got a lot of useful tools here. On Chris's side of things, he's got potentially Aura of Silence if he cares about having more answers to the Sylvan Library that we have. Sideways Web can shut down a Treetop Village. More Swords of Plowshares can deal with our creatures. And Replenish just gives him more ways of getting through our discards. If we discard him a bunch and then he can replenish, it'll be really good. I think we also have Tormod's Crypt in the sideboard on the Jund side as well. So just more stuff to counteract that replenish plan. Alright, we're drawing our opening hands for game number 2. My opener's got Rats, Tormod's Crypt to shut off the replenish plan. There's a Cabal Therapy to go with the Rats, so we can absolutely savage Chris's hand. I think he's having to go to a 6-card hand here. Obviously, the Enchantress deck has a lot of ability to draw extra cards and undo mulligans, but it does need to get an engine in play, so like your Enchantress Presence or your Argothian Enchantress. Without one of those, their deck doesn't really function that well. But they are running 8 of them, and they've got a bunch of tutors that can also find it. So it's relatively likely they can dig out of this one. But let's see what the opener looks like. We do get to absolutely savage it with the classic turn 1 Cabal Therapy, turn 2 Rats, flashback Cabal Therapy. If all goes well, that can be 3 cards taken from your opponent's hand by turn 2. And especially on a mulligan, that's going to be disastrous for Chris. Alright, looks like Chris is having to go to 5, which makes our very discard heavy draw even more powerful. Alright, Chris has decided to keep this 5. He's just working out what he wants to put back. And then we get to have a little look and see what he kept when I Cabal Therapy him on turn 1, which I'm sure I'm going to do. There's an argument for waiting till turn 2 to Cabal Therapy, so they're more likely to have something like Argothian Enchantress in hand. But the curve ends up much better if you go turn 1 Cabal Therapy, turn 2 Rats. Alright, Jund is on the play. We're getting a swamp off of this Bloodstone Mire and pointing a Cabal Therapy at Chris's hand. So he's got a Sterling Grove, 3 lands, and an Expiration. So he's going to be very quick at getting his hand empty, which has both pros and cons in the matchup, because it means Ravenous Rats is more likely to take an important card, but also there's going to be fewer things for us to like duress and Cabal Therapy away. So now it's back to me, and we are dropping... I assume it's the Rats here. That would make the most sense. So the Rats comes in. Chris has to choose a card to lose. I think there's an Opalescence as the extra card in his hand. I'm not playing out the Tormod's Crypt until there's something worth crypting away. Because if our opponent has a Seal of Cleansing, they can blow it up and we get no value. But as soon as Chris puts any enchantment into his graveyard, that's going to incentivize me to try and take the other one. Okay, so we've left Chris with just nothing here. He can't cast a Replenish just yet either, so I haven't deployed the Tormod's Crypt just yet. Back to me. Looks like we're doing a Call of the Herd, getting an elephant in. We just want to get pressure while our opponent's doing nothing, and now we play the Tormod's Crypt the turn before our opponent can cast a replenish, so we can get the value out of this one without just getting hit earlier by a seal if we played it out. Getting in 3 damage with the elephant, and we're just going to put the pedal to the metal, play another elephant here from the flashback of the Call of the Herd, and assemble 6 power. So Chris should be on 17 here. The life total at the bottom is just wrong at the moment. Apologies for that. So we crack him for 6. And there's 2 Swords to Plowshares. Both of our elephants are going bye-bye. But it's a nice 2-for-1. We've already played this attrition-based game, and our opponent doesn't have a draw engine. So the Call of the Herd getting 2 cards out of our opponent's hand, as well as the Ravenous Rats getting 2 cards, is pretty good too. Looks like there's a follow-up play from my Jund side of things. 4 mana. That pretty much is only just an Obstinate Baloth in the deck. So here it is. And now there's a 4-power guy. This is a 4-turn clock at the board, on the board at present. Chris is obviously hemorrhaged resources in a huge way here. They mulliganed a lot, and they got their hand super attacked. So now it's just, can Jund close things off before Enchantress finds the bits and pieces required to push itself over the edge? There's 4 damage. There is a Sylvan Library and an Engineered Plague in my hand here. So the Sylvan Library comes down first. This is just going to give us the ability to find more stuff. We've got plenty of life here as well, so I imagine the chance of us drawing 2 additional cards next turn off this library are very, very high. Here I'm also deciding if I want to play the Engineered Plague. The reason you might not want to play it is so you play it after the fact, so you definitely kill an Enchantress, instead of just making it so they can't play an Enchantress until they get a seal. But the problem with doing that is if your opponent has an enchantment in hand that they're sandbagging, which is relatively likely, then they can just play an Enchantress and then play the seal and then get a card. So even if you do play the Engineered Plague later on, it's going to kill one thing they already would have cantripped off of it. So it's not going to be as bad as just stopping them getting their draw engine going at all. Another Tormod's Crypt is probably not what I'm looking for. I think this is just a classic pay 8 and just draw through the pile, attack, and see what the Parallax Wave does here on Chris's side of things. I think we just check in on life totals to make sure there's no discrepancy. I choose to put the Baloth underneath the Parallax Wave instead of sacrificing it to draw an extra card effectively off of this Sylvan Library later on. Just another land, and then it's back over to Chris's side. The wave is ticking its way down, and then it's back over to Jund's side. There's a Ravenous Rats and a Duress here. I think Chris has got 2 cards in hand, so if we take all of these, we can then punish. Yeah, that looks like a solid pay 8 again to draw a couple extra cards. So the Duress leads first, so that it's more likely to hit. Okay, just 2 Serra Sanctums. Not very exciting on Chris's side of things. Now they are like the most expensive card in the deck, I believe, and they are incredibly useful at generating a lot of mana, but in the situation Chris finds himself in, it doesn't really help. So we can play a Ravenous Rats on the Jund side of things. It takes out a card, that's fine, whatever. But also it can start chipping in for damage, and if the Parallax Wave exiles it, then it can come back later and take another card. And if the Parallax Wave ticks down, that's good for us. What you want is the Parallax Wave to be so loaded by the time the Opalescence comes into play, it can't do very much. So here we see the one of Terminate that I kept in post-board, because the numbers work out that you end up with like 1 Terminate or 1 Lightning Bolt. And I keep the Terminate in, because if things go wrong and you can terminate like a Parallax Wave when an Opalescence is in play, that's really good. So we've kept the Terminate on top, and we're floating it on top of our library. Now we play this Tempting Worm. We know Chris has basically got nothing here. So it's a pretty free 5/5, and it's also going to tick down this Parallax Wave. So now I'm going to deploy this Bloodstained Mire. This gives us the ability to shuffle away that Terminate or leave it on top if our opponent finds Opalescence. Alright, looks like Chris has found something to play. It's a Sterling Grove. I think he's going to pass back to us. So if he removes his Tempting Worm, then he'll have no counters left on his Parallax Wave. This is me deciding if I want to keep the Terminate. And my logic here is, the way I lose this game is if our opponent assembles Opalescence and Parallax Wave, sorry. So just keeping the Terminate as a thing that we have access to seems like a good play. The Tempting Worm is going to attack, so is the Ravenous Rats. They're going to put the worm underneath the wave, potentially, or they can take 5 from it. If they take 5, it means their Parallax Wave won't be going away next turn. And we would have lethal damage next turn anyway. Kind of a tricky situation that Chris finds himself in here, just getting attacked by a bunch of guys. If we can strip the last counter off the Parallax Wave, that makes things a lot easier. Obviously taking 6 isn't really where Chris wants to be either though. Replenish is already covered by the Tormod's Crypt, so that's not an issue over on the Jund side of things in terms of how this game plans out. It's just a case of, can Chris assemble Opal Wave combo? And just keeping the card that actually breaks that up is very much what I want to do in this situation. Even though that's a card that looks pretty bad in this matchup, it does find targets in situations where you're behind. And that's kind of where you want your cards to be good, right? You want your cards to be good when you're behind. If you're already like ahead, you don't need your cards to do stuff. So this is where I play a second Tormod's Crypt to get through the potential of a Seal of Cleansing. Chris is going to fire off this Sterling Grove at end step. This probably has to go and get a second Parallax Wave here, because there's no counters on the existing Parallax Wave. So by keeping this Terminator in our hand, we're playing around our opponent just getting a Parallax Wave for this turn and then an Opalescence the turn after. We're just sort of identifying the one way that this game slips away from us and making sure we've got that covered using the card we have available. So yeah, here comes the other wave. The existing Parallax Wave is going to go away and bring back the Tempting Worm, which allows Chris to then put something in for free off of its trigger if he wants. It also brings back our Ravenous Baloth. Although I suspect Chris doesn't really have much going on in his hand at this point. I think it's just the other Serra's Sanctum, if we remember rightly, because we took one of those before, we didn't take the other one. So that's going to still be there. So this Tempting Worm is not really going to do anything in terms of triggers that help Chris. All right, we're back onto Chris's side. He's drawing his Parallax Wave. He doesn't have much choice other than casting it. Not taking a pain off the brush hand to play it. So then we have the Parallax Wave in. So again, we're in that situation where I've got the Terminate in hand now, because that's the thing that gets us out of a really bad spot if our opponent plays the Opalescence here. All right, just shuffling away, getting our Sylvan Library value here. And it's time to library. There's Call of the Herd, a Duress, and a Lanoir Wastes. Not a particularly exciting selection of things. We're more looking for things like Naturalizers. The fact we haven't found any of our Naturalizers or Tranquil Domains this game is showing how well the deck can perform even in bad situations. So this hides a Tempting Worm. I think Chris is tempted to take 5 here. All right, looks like Chris might be winding this down again. Okay, he's going down to 3 with it to get rid of the Baloth as well. I decide not to sacrifice this because we're expecting to get these creatures back one way or the other at some point soon. That puts Chris down to 8. We can deploy an Elephant. Just has an extra little bit of blocking ability here to make sure we're not going to just get killed by Opalescence. Although we should be alright into that. Alright, Chris is drawn for turn. The wave is ticked down. Sterling Grove for Chris here. So he's got one more turn on this Parallax Wave. So he's going to have to take the damage this turn, I think. What do we have here? Some Duress action, not really great. We know that Chris has got a Serra's Sanctum in hand. So we send in the Clowns, put Chris down to 4, and then he untaps, and he's going to have access to this Opalescence because he gets to tutor for it using the Sterling Grove at the end of our turn. So now he's going to shuffle along, look for the Opalescence, and assemble this. What this will mean, though, is Parallax Wave will have 1 counter on it, right? So Parallax Wave can target itself to reset itself and then set the combo up. But I have the ability to respond to that when it has no additional counters and just shoot it and make sure it goes away forever. Because it won't be able to blink itself, it's just going to die to the Terminate. So at this point I know that I have the game won. And there's nothing that Chris can do about it because we know the card in his hand, we know the card he's about to draw, and we already have the answer that we chose to keep earlier in case this sort of situation happened. Playing around like worst case scenarios, and obviously that's what's happened for us here. So here is the Opalescence. So now he targets it to itself so he can get to reset the counters. But in response, I get to terminate it, which blows it up, brings back my guys, and allows me to swing for lethal. And that is game number 2. No enchantment destruction at all in that one, but we managed to get over the line. Let's see how we fare in game number 3. Right, we've got opening hands. Looks like we're both keeping 7 here. Chris starts off on a Wild Growth. Over on my side, I've just drawn a Naturalize, which is nice. We get to dress and see what Chris's keep was. There is a Replenish there. There is 2 Sterling Groves, an Enchantress Presence, and another land. So there is no white mana over here for Chris. So we take the Enchantress's Presence. That's the only thing he can cast at this point in time. Looks like we have access to all of our colours in the Jund side of things because we've got the Daragaz's Caldera there. There's the Forest we knew about. A Tranquil Domain, another useful card in the matchup for sure. I've got some options available here. I could just try and get this Sylvan Library in before Chris gets to do very much. I could try and Ravenous Rats and just take a little bite out of what Chris is doing here. So we're going to go for the Caldera into the Sylvan Library here. This just gives us the chance of making sure we hit land drops and just get to deploy all the spells in our hand. So Chris has found an Enchantress, which is pretty good, and getting a card draw off of playing the Exploration. So it's back over on the Jund side of things. Some more hand disruption, a Tempting Worm, and a Call of the Herd. So a lot of useful tools. Pressure is really important to make this matchup work. And then also hand disruption is very good too. So we're deploying this Swamp. The Diabolic Edict is very useful at taking out the Argothian Enchantress. And then it's being passed back to Chris. The adding in of the Diabolic Edict was a recent addition that I changed for this particular tournament, specifically to give us slightly more edge against Enchantress in Game 1, as well as being good against things like Terravor, and it worked out pretty well for us. So Chris has found a white source, so he can deploy a Sterling Grove here. The one thing that I'm nervous about at this stage, from my side of the board, is the fact that we don't have the Graveyard locked down yet. So Chris is going for a Replenish just to get back an Enchantress's Presence, because that's so critical to how his deck functions. So now we're Sylvan Librarying. How many cards do we take here? All right, we're paying 4 life now. So one of the reasons we're doing this is because we want to make sure we're hitting land drops whilst also trying to get some threats going. I've got a Naturalize ready for this Enchantress's Presence. And then a Cabal Therapy taking the 2 Sterling Groves that we know Chris has. And there's a Parallax Wave as the last card in hand. So Chris is getting kind of dismantled by the hand destruction here. I think the other option that he could have done last time was to play the Sterling Grove to make Cabal Therapy worse. Alright, a Seal of Cleansing is good and gets rid of our card advantage engine. But now we probably get to put some damage into play. So we know Chris has got 1 card in hand, so it's time for a Duress, stripping the last card, and then we can play the big Worm, and then we've got a really good clock, and our opponent is just living off the top. So we've done the Jund thing. Our opponent is out of resources, and we get to just fire him with a big Worm. Enchantress's Presence is a good draw for our opponent, of course. But we've just drawn the Tormos Crypt. That's going to make it so we're not worried about the Replenish plan. So here's the Crypt. And then the Tranquil Domain is probably just worth it here. Okay, now we're going for the Elephant instead. So our opponent can draw like 1 card off the top, but they can't really like snowball it. And if we play the threat, it does dramatically change our clock to a 2-turn clock. So basically our opponent has a card draw off of this, and then a card draw off of like the next thing they do, and their next turn, and that's going to be it for them. So I think getting the pressure in makes the sense here. Right, just a land from Chris. Untapping with the Worm. Let's get smashing in. So this is a big 8 damage. And it's probably time for a Tranquil Domain, I would say. Looks like I am thinking about it here, just playing the land out. Right, just getting a rat in. It's not going to take any cards because Chris doesn't have any. We're keeping the Tranquil Domain in hand in case Chris draws a Parallax Wave. Parallax Tide. No, yeah, it is Wave, sorry. Parallax Wave, because then he can exile all the creatures, but then we just get them back, if that's what happens. So I like actually holding on to the Tranquil Domain. Obviously, I was more in the zone when I was playing this game than when I'm watching it, and that certainly makes sense. Because we're not going to lose to our opponent drawing extra cards. We're going to lose to our opponent playing something like Solitary Confinement or Solitary Confinement after drawing additional cards, or the Parallax Wave. I can't quite make out what that is, but Chris needed this card to be good, and it was bad. All right, Jund takes it down again. So you've managed to watch me on camera winning twice, which is nice for you. Let's go to the 4th round of the tournament. Welcome to round number 4. Guess who's back? Yep, it's me. I spent most of this tournament on table 1. I think after this we get some other people on camera, but here I am. And I'm playing Jund, and we're playing against Enrico, who's playing his own take on the domain strategy. I believe Enrico is on the play, and he's taken a mulligan to 6 here. So this is a matchup where we can really attack the domain player's hand And they have a lot of stuff that enables our Cabal therapy. And what I mean by that is things like the Factual Fiction and the Cabal and the Burning Wish. They both put cards in their hand that maybe they don't immediately get to fire off, so we can snipe them with other bits and pieces. All right, our hand here is quite aggressive. We're leading off with a Grim Lavamancer. So I kept this hand. It has access to 2 of our colours. And if we find any land, we get to start playing a bunch of elephants. We don't have any black mana right now, though. That was the hand we kept. It was like Grim Lavamancer, a couple of Call of the Herds. And our opponent here, Enrico, is deploying a Rampant Growth to try and fix their mana. Their particular domain list having the City of Brass is a bit unusual for some of these decks. He's gone a little bit less on the fetch lands and more into having a few lands that do just tap for all colours to help him out. Alright, we are untapping on my side of things. We've drawn a black card, not a black land. So not great here. We deploy our Treetop Village. If we draw any land, we can start making elephants and really pressuring our opponent. If we draw a black land, we can disrupt their hand with our duresses. But we do need to find some sort of land. Like on the draw, I'm quite happy to keep a 2-lander. I expect to draw a 3rd land with 24 lands in the deck. Enrico also has a Chromatic Sphere in play. I think it's, yeah, Sphere is the one that's legal. Star is the one from Time Spiral. So yeah, so Chromatic Sphere to help fix mana. So this is just going to be filtering some mana into a different colour. And here is a Burning Wish. Now, what does he find with this Burning Wish? There are a lot of options. I'm not sure if he's got a full 15-card Wish package or not, but there's a lot in there. I think at this stage, he's probably just looking for more card advantage. So just try and find something that's going to allow him to draw a bunch of cards. Or if he's worried about specific things, he might be looking at whatever based on what he suspects we have. So if he wants removal for specific threats that he knows that we play in our deck, because obviously he's got a reasonable idea of what we're playing at this point. I think he's seen me playing a previous... Actually, I don't know if he has seen me playing a previous round. I think I was sat next to him in a previous one. Okay, so here's a Pyroclasm. Just going for an answer to the on-board threat. That's fair enough. And he's immediately casting it and getting rid of our Grim Lavamancer. That's going to be the end of Enrico's turn, and then we're going to pass back to me. And we have failed to draw a black source. So we've got nothing but uncastables in hand right now. We really need to hit that 3rd land. We had 3 draw steps to hit any land. That would have been fine. The fact that we missed on all of them is unfortunate, but it is what it is. That's magic. Enrico is just passing back. That is very much a telegraphed Fact or Fiction. I've got 8 cards in hand, so before I go to clean up... Alright, our opponent is doing a Fact or Fiction, and we'll be lightning bolting them. And now they do a little Fact or Fiction pile. So the Guy's Blessing, if this goes into the graveyard here, it will immediately shuffle everything in. We don't have an immediate answer to this Exalted Angel that I'm aware of, and they can just play it next turn. So we're in a bit of trouble here. Obviously, the other Fact or Fiction is a lot of cards. We're almost incentivized to get our opponent doing... I was just explaining to my opponent here that the graveyard order matters. These cards go into the graveyard before the Fact or Fiction does. I'm basically telling him I have Phyrexian Furnace in my deck. Alright, so... The pile probably has to split up the Angel and the Fact or Fiction here. And the other cards doesn't... Well, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because obviously this Reflecting Pool will really help out his mana. But we kind of want to incentivize him to take the smaller pile. And quite how to do that, I don't know. It's probably just going to be a case of him taking whatever he wants based on what's in his hand. So is he going to take the larger pile with the Fact or Fiction and keep the cards flowing? I kind of would rather have the Fact or Fiction in my opponent's hand at this point because we don't have an answer to the Exalted Angel. But he's just taken the Exalted Angel, so maybe he's worked out that we don't have an answer for it because we put it in the small pile. There's so many different games within games when you start playing with Fact or Fiction. So Enrico's going to shuffle up, and we're passing back to him. I suspect this is just going to be a turn where he deploys a Morph. Or he might wait to cast it for 6 mana. He might not know that we've got a bunch of hand disruption in our deck. Right, he's just playing the Morph without taking any pain. This gives us the opportunity to draw a Lightning Bolt. Unfortunately, we did fire off a Lightning Bolt last turn instead of discarding because we didn't want to discard. And I think that was maybe a mistake on our part where we could have held on to Lightning Bolt and just discarded one of the black cards that we can't cast. Although we have drawn a black source this turn. This is going to require us to find an answer to the Exalted Angel if we want to win this game. So we're getting a Duress off. So the reason I'm duressing here is we basically need to answer the angel. So making sure we duress and take out an answer that can stop it is pretty handy, although the incentive to take out this Fact or Fiction is also pretty high. So I end up probably going for the Fact or Fiction here, knowing that if we can deploy multiple black spells, we can stop them having answers. Because we can take a bunch of damage from this Exalted Angel, but then we can gain control of the game by just disrupting our opponent's hand. So the Angel's being flipped, and in comes the damage, and my life total starts going down. I think it's back over to us. I'm not sure what we need outside of Terminate here. More hand disruption. The other option we could have had last time was just to start playing out elephants and see if we can win that way. But I think the option I've gone for here is to try and impact our opponent's hand in such a way that we get to be able to be secure once we draw a Terminate. Now, this does require us to draw a Terminate, but I think that's a reasonable out to have, because if we just made a bunch of elephants and kept turning them sideways, that might not be good enough. And then when we try to actually hit our opponent's creature, if there's no discard first, then they could just have an answer. And there's no sort of additional black mana forthcoming for us over here on the Jund side, which means we have to just play towards trying to draw the Terminate and making sure it's live when we draw it. A lot of this stems from discarding that, from firing that lightning bolt at our opponent's face, so we didn't have to go to discard. We could have just discarded one of our black cards. I don't believe we had a Cabal Therapy. I think it was just Duresses and the Ravenous Rats, but that's definitely how this game could have turned completely. A Pernicious Deed is just going to make sure any creatures we have don't get anything done. And Rico is now out of cards, so we don't need any hand disruption from this point onwards. We can play elephants and try and force the cracking of the deed, but it's not looking great for us here. We definitely could have played this one differently by not discarding the lightning bolt. Although, knowing our opponent's deck going into this, they were playing on a domain deck, I didn't actually know they were running the Exalted Angels. I thought they were just going to be a very heavy spells deck. I think they only actually run 2 angels in their list. Or maybe 2 in the main, 2 in the board. Like, their main win condition is Decree of Justice rather than the Exalted Angel. So I wasn't really holding out for that, and then we immediately got punished. Although, we could have waited for our opponent to resolve the Fact or Fiction because they were really keen to do it. However, the way that priority works is I had to cast that lightning bolt first, otherwise I just go to discard before knowing my opponent is casting anything. So even though my opponent was very eager to fire in a Fact or Fiction, I kind of had to play around it in the way that it's supposed to be. So I had to sort of make him take it back. Anyway, it's our turn here. We're just sort of under the gun from this. We've got Ravenous Rats taking the last card in Enrico's hand. It was a Pyroclasm. We get to attack for 3 here. And then we just have one more turn to try and find a Terminate. If we find the Terminate, though, we'll probably be in a good position. Alright, we're cracking the deed here, taking out both of my guys. That's fine. We've got loads of cards to use. We just haven't got the ability to use them. Alright, Enrico goes up above 20 and we go down to being 1 hit away from death. Is there anything we can do in this situation? Alright, it looks like our opponent's got something else here. What is being added to the board? It's a Crozen Tusker. So now we're very dead to both of these guys. Alright, and that unfortunately is the game. Our hand did not really come together. We kept a red and green mana hand and never really got to cast our black spells until it was too late. And if we had drawn like a land so we didn't have to discard, then we would have had the lightning bolt for the morphed angel and everything would have been a little bit different. But alas, on to the second game. From my sideboard here, I think I'm bringing in some hand disruptions. So I've got one more Cabal Therapy. I've got some Red Elemental Blast for the Fact or Fictions and counter spells and such. And that's probably about all we're bringing in. There's an argument to bring in a Naturalize in case they've got the Domain Enchantment I can't remember the name of. And then what is our opponent bringing in? Probably more removal, maybe if they've got some more plows in the board. But a lot of their board is a wish board, so they're not going to have that much space to bring stuff in. Alright, we're shuffling up for the second game here. Just cutting each other's decks and getting ready to start with me playing the Jund on the play. Looks like some hand disruption, which is where the deck really wants to be. So this looks like a turn 1 Duress with a Cabal Therapy to follow up, which is always a nice place to be. So here comes the Duress. Not a lot of targets. Okay, so there's a few targets here that are worth taking. It's just the Decree and the Wrath, but we can't take any of the lands. The Crozen Tusker isn't takeable, and the Guy's Blessing isn't something we want to take either. So it's a case of, are we just trying to get rid of removal, or are we trying to get rid of win conditions? It's probably the two main things considered here. The double City of Brass is very awkward for Enrico and is going to allow a lot of free damage to be taken, which is certainly going to help our cause as the Jund player here. Just making sure it's all written down to keep track of all the information and passing it back over to Enrico. A basic forest and a pass. Alright, he's showing the camera that he drew the Decree of Justice, so the Thoughtseize bug is real in real life as well as online. A Sylvan Library is what I'm dropping next. This is going to give us the ability to pull ahead on resources, which makes our 1-for-1 discard spells even better. A City of Brass into a Gaia's Blessing from Enrico's side of things. This is going to just replace itself and make sure there's another win condition in the deck in the form of that Decree of Justice. And then it's going to be passed back to me, and I'm going to start resolving my library while he's shuffling up. Looks like there is a Terminate, a Call of the Herd, and a Swamp. This could be taking multiple cards this turn and just stay on the front foot forward, getting more card advantage and disrupting Enrico and his domain strategy. Alright, taking 4 damage off the Sylvan Library to put another card in hand. I think there is another Sylvan Library in our hand here, which isn't ideal. Looks like it's just going to be a Call of the Herd getting in an Elephant. It's over to Enrico here. There's the other City of Brass. So any tapping of mana is going to be very, very painful here. The library ticks up again. I think there's a Worm, a Duress, and a Call of the Herd. So we could be seeing a Worm coming into play this turn, depending what's in Enrico's hand. We know there's a Crozen Tusker. I wonder if that's something he's interested in cycling off this turn. Seems likely, because that's just going to help him accelerate his game plan into getting towards 4 mana where his big haymakers like Fact or Fiction are. And being able to Burning Wish whilst also finding the mana to cast whatever he's found. I'm leaning on a Cabal Therapy here. This is going to potentially force the cycle of the Crozen Tusker, because we could name the Crozen Tusker. Right, looks like he's firing the Crozen Tusker in response, but this will give us the ability to know what he's drawn from the Crozen Tusker cycle, which is kind of a big deal. This is likely to take the Wrath and just allow us to keep applying pressure without having any answers on the opposing side of the battlefield. Do love a Crozen Tusker. What a great card that is. Okay, so there goes the Crozen Tusker. Now he's got a card, and then I name the Wrath of God, I believe, here. Yeah, so we've seen there's a Source to Plowshares over there, the Fact or Fiction, Crack Star, Stroke of Genius, Decree of Justice, quite a lot of stuff there. Now, it's quite mana intensive, which means these City of Brasses are going to keep eating into his life total. This means probably getting in for 3 here. And then it's a choice of playing the Worm into the Source of Plowshares, which seems very poor. So I think instead I'm going to opt for a different plan. Could also sacrifice the Elephant to the Cabal Therapy to take the Plow, but that doesn't seem like an ideal situation. Looks like we're going for the Phyrexian Furnace, which we can probably just take this guy's blessing so they can't just infinitely loot their deck, and then it gives us the ability to cycle that into a new card at end step if we want to. A Chromatic Sphere, and then a pass. So in the end step, I decide to get rid of the Wrath of God forever and draw a card. And it's untap and library time. There is just some more guys. There's 13 life to work with here, so I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up seeing me draw additional cards here, but no, it looks like just taking the 1. The Source to Plowshares on the on the Elephant now frees up us to play a Worm, because our opponent has got no removal here. So we can get rid of one of their cards here. There's a Decree, there's a Stroke of Genius, and there's a Fact or Fiction. I think Fact or Fiction is probably the easiest name here with the Duress. Unless it's a case of just making sure our opponent never gets any blockers. Because we do have a 5/5 which can be blocked for 1,000,000 turns. I can't remember which one I take here. It's definitely between the Fact and the Decree. Because the Decree represents us not being able to clock our opponent. Alright, we go for the way that our opponent has to interact with our threat. And then we can just play this Tempting Worm, which allows our opponent to put in a forest. We don't really care about that. We've got a massive beta now. Because also, by putting the Tempting Worm in, we accelerate potentially how many lands they have to make the Decree bigger. So I think I like taking the Decree there and just trying to get stuck in with the Worm over a few turns. Because if they tap both of these City of Brasses twice, then the worm is a 2-turn clock. Our opponent's taken a pretty scary amount of damage from these City of Brass. Alright, looks like a Burning Wish for a Vindicate here. And it's back to me with the Sylvan Library. I think we do a pretty worm-heavy play this turn, perhaps. Right, taking 4 extra life. Whenever you gain extra life from Swords to Plowshares, it's just more cards you get to draw with your library, which is always a nice place to be. Looks like it's time for our Cabal Therapy. This is going to take the Fact or Fiction and leave our opponent with just a Stroke of Genius, which is a very mana-intensive way of drawing cards. And then we're kind of free to drop a threat. So here comes the Worm. It's 2 to 3 turns depending on how much our opponent taps their City of Brasses. Looks like a Wall of Blossoms for our opponent there. And a Rampant Growth. Taking 1 point of pain. This is going to help fix their mana and maybe make them less reliant on these City of Brass, which is going to be certainly something that Enrico is interested in, because those City of Brass have really done the damage. Back over to me on Jund, and we are looking at some more cards. Looks like some lands and a threat. I think that's 2 basics and an elephant. So there's a Terminate available in our hand as well. So we could just Terminate and push damage, whilst also deploying an elephant. Or we could just attack and take the Wall of Blossoms out. Alright, looks like we took an extra card to make sure we can make our land drop. That probably means we're going for elephants this turn. Right, goodbye to the Wall of Blossoms. Right, we're just flashing back the Call of the Herd. And then playing a land. So this is so that next turn we have enough mana to do everything we could possibly want to. And also by paying life into Sylvan Library, we get to see more cards. So maybe we find another piece of hand disruption. Looks like Enrico is in a bit of a spot of bother there. Feels like he might have a Burning Wish here. I think that's what he drew. I can't remember though. Alright, so we're cycling this Chromatic Sphere. This could be getting the mana so that they can cast a Burning Wish. There is a Reflecting Pool. Alright, so just doing a Decree here. This is going to hurt them a little bit because of the City of Brass, but it's going to give them some blockers for a few turns. At first I thought they were casting it for Angels, and I was really confused about how many they were playing here. I thought they were just doing an Angel because that would only be 1 Angel that they could make. I was actually really worried if they made an Angel, or if they made 2 Angels, because then we're at quite a low life total and it becomes a bit of a weird race if they can find any removal spell. But it's back over to us, and there's just a little handful of soldiers over there. I remember my Sylvan Library trigger before I put the card into the hand. That's why I should always do things slowly. I think we just got a land here and nothing else going on. So we can send them in and clear off a couple of these soldiers. They just go under the bus. And then we can either make some more elephants or we can just hold back. I think we go for more elephants here. We can always flash it back later, because this gives us actually lethal. Because our opponent's on 9, so hitting them for 8 wouldn't be enough. So this way our Terminate could be lethal this turn if there's nothing else going on. I think Enrico has 2 cards in hand to choose from here. What are we looking to do? I can't remember what happens next. I don't think it goes well for Enrico though, as you can imagine, because there's a lot of beef in play. He's going to need a really big haymaker to get back in the game here. Alright, he's just passing to me. I was debating whether or not I wanted to terminate the guy. I'm just doing our Sylvan Library here. Just a bunch of lands, but one of them is a fetch land, so we do get the ability to shuffle this pile for next turn, if next turn is going to be a relevant turn. We could just go for the Terminate and push lethal here. Alright, me once again asking how many cards Enrico has in hand, and how scared of them we have to be. I think I decide against just trying to remove the creature. It looks like a big play coming this way. A Stroke of Genius. So they're doing a big stroke here in an attempt to find a Swords to Plowshares. This now puts them down quite low, but they are going to have a lot of cards if they untap here. So they're going to take 6 damages and go to 2 and lose their guy. This switches off the second City of Brass. They can tap 1 City of Brass once, and they're going to need an answer that kills all of the stuff in play. I play out my fetch land so I can shuffle the Sylvan Library and passing it back to Enrico, who's now going to deploy something. Well, he's either got to do that or he's probably dead. So I imagine we're going to see a spell here. Okay. Another Reflecting Pool. That certainly makes his mana considerations a lot easier. He doesn't have a lot of domain either, so his domain spells aren't really that live right now. We're just seeing a Fact or Fiction. Right, so there is a Swords to Plowshares and a Wall of Blossoms. So from the part of distributing this pile, keeping the Plow and the Wall of Blossoms separate so they can't answer two creatures in combat in one turn makes a lot of sense. In terms of the other cards, I don't think it matters too much where they go because this is going to be condensed very much into the next turn and a half, 2 turns of gameplay. There's a question of, are we trying to incentivize our opponent to take one pile over the other? Would I rather my opponent had this Wall of Blossoms or this Swords to Plowshares? If we put 2 cards with the Wall of Blossoms like this, our opponent is very incentivized to take this Wall of Blossoms because they get the extra card. Also, the Fact or Fiction is definitely better than the Rampant Growth. So it seems to me like our opponent is probably invested in taking the bigger pile here, which is probably going to end up with them drawing something off the Wall of Blossoms and hoping to find another removal spell. But then the other removal spell won't be enough because we already have the Terminate for their Wall of Blossoms. Alright, they did not find what they needed and they are scooping it up. So we are going to a game 3 with Enrico on the play. Okay, looks like I'm getting my opening hand here. Enrico's already kept, so maybe I was on 6 at this point. There's double hand disruption, a Terminate and a Worm. It's not a bad position for us to be in when we want to be putting the aggro in. Looks like I'm deciding against keeping the Terminate and just keeping lands and ways of attacking our opponent's hand. Enrico leads off on a Plains. I start off on a classic Duress. Let's see what Enrico is working with. We've got a selection of things here. So 2 lands. The mana here on Enrico's side looks very poor. There is no access to mana apart from white mana. Kind of wild that they kept this. Obviously, their deck is probably full of lands and they can draw out of it. And they do clearly like the spells they have. But what do we got? The Pernicious Deed, if we're trying to be aggressive, the Pernicious Deed is probably what we want to attack. If we want to get rid of specific problems our opponent can reach out for, then it's the Burning Wish. If we're playing attrition here, then it's the Fact or Fiction. We go for the Pernicious Deed to just make it so our creatures are powerful. The Pernicious Deed is also something they can put in off of a Tempting Worm, and you don't really want your opponent to be benefiting off your Tempting Worm very much. Right, it looks like they found the land on top, which gave them the colour they needed to cast a spell in their hand. So it turns out it was a great keep after all. No problems. I suspect we're going to see this Wall of Blossoms, and we're going to see them drawing an extra card. So here comes the wall. Maybe this finds them another coloured source of a different colour. So now I have a decision here. We can just slam this Tempting Worm, or we could play the library. Looks like we're going for the library just to get some card advantage going. It also means next turn we can probably play a piece of hand disruption to check for the worm before we play it, to make sure there's not like a Pernicious Deed that's just going to come in and ruin our day. And I quite like that. Also, just checking for removal in general is really handy. Enrico is playing out their Reflecting Pool and then sending it back our way. So now we get to untap and do library things. Looks like 2 lands and a Cabal Therapy. I'm taking 1 additional card here, leaving the Darangaz's Caldera, but taking the fetch land. So this is a turn where we could really attack our opponent's hand and possibly get a threat in and start the clock running. There is a Duress. So we're faced with a similar choice again, where we have the Decree of Justice as a thing that we could take to stop them being able to block us. We could also take the Fact or Fiction, since we're going to be accelerating our opponent's mana this turn if we're playing the Worm. Same with the Burning Wish is another problem. It looks like we're going for the Fact or Fiction to just reduce the overall amount of resources our opponent has access to. I don't mind that. And now I think I'm deciding if I want to Cabal Therapy them or if I want to play the Worm. It is a relatively awkward situation, because with the Burning Wish, if they have any really big Haymakers, we could always just wait till they go and find the Haymaker and then take it with the Cabal Therapy they don't know about. So it's an interesting decision to be made. Is it time to get the clock in, or is it time to disrupt? I'm in the tank for a little while on this one, and I decide to pass the turn here. Try and save up for a bigger turn where we cast more spells in one go. And maybe they'll get their Burning Wish going, and then we can take it with the Cabal Therapy. Because given what we did to our opponent last turn, they're more likely to just cast this Burning Wish. They're going for a Morph. That is a little bit worrying for us since we don't have an immediate answer to it. But we get to shuffle this library, and we got to dig 3 cards deep to find a Terminate or a Diabolic Edict. So you've got 5 answers we're looking for among 3 cards, and we're already a reasonable portion of the way into our deck. So I think it's reasonable to find it. And if we don't find it, it doesn't matter straight away. It takes a few turns before it really matters. So our opponent isn't really an aggressive deck. So if we just answer their threat, and so be it. Okay, looks like there is a Diabolic Edict among these cards. We did bring in the Naturalize. I imagine we're just going to push this Naturalize to the bottom. I think we're trying to decide if we want to pay for and take the extra card and then shuffle away with the fetch land in the hand. That could be an option here. It's always very tempting to pay a bunch of life when you have a Sylvan Library in play. Okay, just taking the 1, and it is the Worm. Okay, looks like we're deploying the Worm here. Our opponent gets to put in 1 land and nothing else. And then I'm playing a second Worm. So now Enrique can untap. And if he wants to, he can flip the Angel. But this race isn't going to be going well for him. He's going to be hitting us for 4, but we're going to be hitting for 10. And we have the removal spell in hand. So we're trying to make Enrico invest this turn into flipping the Angel and then casting the Burning Wish. That's the plan. Okay, here comes the Burning Wish. And maybe the hope is that he goes and gets something big that he can't cast. Because if he doesn't flip the Angel this turn, then we don't really care and we can just keep sending anyway. He might just be going for something like a Vindicate here, just a way of answering some of the pressure we have. Just have to manage the board as best possible, really. And work on the inevitability that his deck can eventually get to with all the card advantage it has. And the Guy's Blessings to keep cycling through the deck again and again. Tanking long and hard on this Burning Wish choice. Alright, he eventually settles on getting the Vindicate and immediately fires it off on a Worm, which means he can't attack with his Angel this turn. And then we get to start sending our Worm in and wait for them to spend a bunch of mana on an Angel that we can then Diabolic Edict. So we're not just going to Diabolic Edict this turn for the sake of having better mana on our turn. We just want to make our opponent waste their time on flipping the Angel. There is the Diabolic Edict on top. Oh, we didn't take the Diabolic Edict earlier, we just left it on top. Alright, that makes sense too. So now the Diabolic Edict is in hand. In comes the Worm. It gobbles up the Wall of Blossoms, which is exactly what we want to happen, because now the Diabolic Edict can kill the Angel. And I think we decide to do it now to play around any sort of counterspell. There's no follow-up threats here, but we do get to play a fetch land if we want to have a look at our library and maybe manipulate the cards so we've got a new set of 3 to look at next turn. We only have a Cabal Therapy in hand, which is not a powerful Magic the Gathering card in this stage of the game necessarily. Looks like they're just passing back. They've got 2 cards in hand. I'm deciding here if I want to crack the Wooded Foothills to thin the library and swap it around. Looks like we're just taking another fetch land. Alright, here comes a Ravenous Rats taking 50% of Enrico's remaining hand. There is a Rampant Growth that goes. There is a Decree of Justice. So they take 2 off of that and they make 3 little guys. So one of them can go under the bus here. And that buys them a little bit more time. This is quite a long round, this one. Okay, so one of these is probably going under the bus. Yes, didn't even make the 3rd token, just assumed it was already under the bus for the Tempting Worm. And then back over to Enrico. I have 1 card in hand. I have a fetch land to shuffle and the Cabal Therapy, I think, is still the remaining card. It looks like a Burning Wish for Enrico's side of things. Necroma's Vengeance that he can't cast now. So holding on to this Cabal Therapy instead of just firing off willy-nilly looks like it's going to pan out for us. And then I have to assume we're going to be cracking this fetch land and shuffling. Also, having the Ravenous Rats in play does make a Cabal Therapy a thing we can flash back later on. So I doubt the Ravenous Rats wants to get involved in combat anytime soon. So in the end step here, I am fetching a basic land to have a fresh look at the top of the library off of the Sylvan Library in our draw step. Much shuffling ensues. Right, back over on the Jun side of things. A fresh look with the library. Looks like a pretty poor selection of cards. It's Fetch Land, Cabal Therapy, and I can't even remember what the other card was there. Nothing that impacts the board or does anything. I think about the rats for a second, but I just want to keep the rats back, I think, here. In comes the worm. And then they're going to block with one of their guys. And then the Cabal Therapy. I've taken so much damage off this Landmark Waste. It's been my only black source the entire game. It's definitely causing a little bit of trouble. So there goes the Achroma's Vengeance. And then there's a Fetch Land to shuffle the library again, so we get to look at 3 fresh ones instead of the 2 on top that suck. Does Enrico have a play here? It is a fact or fiction. Okay, that looks like a Wrath of God, a Gaia's Blessing, a Crows and Tusker, and some lands. So what we decide to do here, I think, is keep the lands away from the Wrath so they can't Wrath immediately. And then we can use that Cabal Therapy in our graveyard to take the Wrath before it does anything. Yep, so we put the Blessing with the Wrath, and then he ends up just taking the larger pile, which then shuffles everything in via the Guy's Blessing. And then just deploys the Reflecting Pool and passes a turn. So here I go, shuffling my library again. Still not got a pain-free black source yet, somehow. It is a little bit awkward for us. But our opponent isn't really putting a lot of pressure on, so it's not the main thing that matters. But it would be nice to not have to have spent... I don't know how much life has been spent via this Landmark Wastes. Probably like 5. Like a couple of Duresses, a Cabal Therapy, a Ravenous Rats. Right, back over to my side of things. There is a Duress alongside another Ravenous Rats. And we know Enrico's got the Crows and Tusker in hand. Bit of an interesting choice that we can make here, because we can take an extra card to allow our Curse Scroll to start working immediately. But we also do need to consider what's in our opponent's hand once they cycle this Crows and Tusker. Okay, just the Tempting Worm coming in. It gets blocked. And now it's time for the Curse Scroll. So next turn we can start shooting our opponent for 2. This can also blow some Decree of Justice creatures out of the way. I do wonder if we're supposed to take 4 extra damage that turn just to get the Curse Scroll up and running straight away, which can then shoot the Soldier token and allow us to get in for 6. That's definitely a play that we could have done differently. Okay, looks like our opponent has deployed this Crows and Tusker. And we have found a Terminate, which is quite a handy card to have. It does cost us yet another life, which is probably why I was reluctant to pay the life to get the Curse Scroll down and working a turn earlier, because the life is a lot. So we're shooting them with the Curse Scroll first, and then we terminate their guy and get in for 6. Because if we'd have Sylvan Libraried the extra card, we would be at 1 life now, and that would shut off our black source from this point on, which is not really where I think I want to be. So we have lethal damage in play because we've got the Curse Scroll that we can fire on our turn. And then let's see what Enrico draws. It's a Wall of Blossoms, so that buys them 1 more turn, because they can chump block here. I've got no cards in hand, so we're kind of shields down here. See what Enrico finds. Alright, it's just a land and a pass. So over to me. The Sylvan Library. We look at some cards. None of these cards matter or do anything. However, I don't mind the Daragaz's Caldera being a pain-free source of black mana. That is not irrelevant, that's for sure. Alright, Enrico is going to Dust Bowl our Llanowar Wastes. In response, I fire off this Cursed Scroll and shoot them for 2 because I have this Ravenous Rats in hand. And then we attack in. So they block this, they take 1. They go to 5, so they are dead on board. What can they have to save them here? Like Decree of Justice and stuff works as well. Alright, looks like we're tapping for something big. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. No, that's just 5 mana, isn't it? So this is... It draws them a card for each basic land type they have, but they only have 3 basic land types in their domain deck right now. So they draw 3. Have they found a way to stay alive? They're still playing, so it certainly seems that way. Got a bit of a pause here, possibly trying to work out what is the best line to stay around for another turn. Doing a little bit of maths on the old fingers there, trying to work out what happens. Okay, so he's got something. In the upkeep, we are just going to curse scroll our opponent down to 3. The Sylvan Library is now going to trigger. We can go pick up that Daragaz's Caldera, or we can go and get that Bloodstained Mire and get a pain-free source that also shuffles on top of our library. We get to go to attacks here. If we put our opponent to 1, it's really good for us. So it looks like we're seeing them take a point of pain here. So now they are in range of Curse Scroll. So Curse Scroll can kill them next turn. They got a Decree of Justice for 2. They're going to block them both. So we lose the rats. They lose both their guys. They're not even bothering to get the tokens out because they're just immediately going under the bus. I play the Daragaz's Caldera. And then I play the Ravenous Rats here, which takes one of our opponent's remaining cards. And then it's back over to Enrico. What happens here? Waving his fingers. What has he found? Okay, he found his one of Akroma's Vengeance that he shuffled back in earlier after Burning Wishing. That's obviously going to remove a lot of our permanents. So we lose all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So our lethal Curse Scroll and our lethal threats are all gone now. We don't have Lightning Bolts on our deck post-board for this matchup, I don't believe. Just checking to see what domain is available for our opponent. And then it's back over to us. We get to Duress Enrico and see what he's got. Going to 1 life, tapping this City of Brass for a fact or fiction. This game could be slipping away. Okay, quite a stacked pile here. There's answers for the next thing we try and play in the form of this Pernicious Deed. There is the Wall of Blossoms, which just gets a card and digs a little deeper. There's the City of Blessing, which allows them to recycle all the good stuff that's currently in their graveyard. Pretty strong looking pile. Perhaps the Wall of Blossoms gets put with... Well, it can be put with either pile. So if it goes with the deed, then it gets cleaned up by the deed later. If it goes with the Blessing, then they've kind of got 2 redraws, but they don't have an actual answer for the next thing we play. So trying to incentivize them to have 1 answer or 2 redraws and no answers. And I think that's an interesting choice. I don't really know what the correct pile to go for here is. It's probably the deed, because you're so stone cold dead to like anything we could have. Or no, he's going for the bigger pile and the redraws. And then we get to Duress. What do we take here? He happened to have a Chromatic Sphere, so his hand is just 3 redraws. So I think we just choose to leave him with a 2 mana redraws, so he's less likely to be able to deploy as many things. So the little dice you can see is the turns of extra turns we're in. So we're now in turn 3 of extra turns. So time has been called. This was a long old round, this one. We're both undefeated going into this round as well. Okay, Enrico, what has he got? Here comes the Wall of Blossoms. Guy's Blessing is going to shuffle a couple of things in. We're looking at here the Decree of Justice and another Wall of Blossoms. I was asking if he wanted to tap his City of Brass. Okay, he realised he didn't shuffle everything in that he meant to. So it's fine. Like, we're not under time constraints at this point because we've already hit time on the round. We're just trying to make sure he's counting the right number of cards to be shuffling in here. Because he gets to shuffle in that Wall of Blossoms and he also gets to shuffle in this Chromatic Sphere. But not any other ones. Because I think he was reaching for maybe shuffling another one in. It's been a long old round, this one. Yep, so just shuffling in the Chromatic Star to allow him to thin the deck. It's an interesting choice, actually, a Chromatic Star. Oh, sorry, Chromatic Sphere to shuffle in there. Okay, she's drawing the card off the Guy's Blessing. It looks like it's an Exalted Angel. The problem is he gets 1 attack step here and I'm on 5. So he's not going to be able to actually win this game. But he's managed to bring it back in a nice way, mostly thanks to that Akroma's Vengeance. So I'm going to play this Bloodstained Mire and threaten to tap it, but never tap it because then we die to the 4 damage. So this is the 5th turn of extra turns. Looks like it's going to be a draw, so we're both going to finish this round undefeated unless he somehow comes up with a burn spell in his control deck. Seems unlikely. Yeah, so we're just going for a draw, so we both end up undefeated at the end of this round, and you'll be glad to know that at this point I decided that even though I was still on table 1 of the next pairings, I decided to let other people be on camera here. Alright, let's go to that next round. Alright, we are now into round number 5. So we're getting to the very back end of the tournament here. I think this is a winning in round for both players. On the left we have Sean, I believe, and on the right we have Brad. This is Brad Barkley, who you may know. I think he top 8 at a GP and won the Pro Tour when it was online. So a classic player from back in the day. I've known for a long time. Very good player. Let's see how this game transpires. I believe the matchup is blue-white control on the left. This is like the big blue-white control with Temple of the False God and stuff. And on the right is Brad playing the Allurin deck. Looks like Brad has won the die roll and is going to be going first. Let's see what their opening hands look like. So the way this Allurin deck functions is it gets to a certain point and then just infinitely plays Richard Cutpurse, which makes your opponent sacrifice a permanent unless they play one. So you can just make them sacrifice all of their permanents, then beat them down with whatever. And then whenever they play a permanent, you can just make them lose it. And it puts them in a really horrible spot. If we see Sean's hand here, it looks like a selection of lands and spells. And we're leading off with a Windswept Heath from Brad's side of things. Putting out Forest, we're probably going to see some kind of mana dork, I would imagine. Most likely Birds of Paradise to help with the colour requirements of the deck. Looks like there's a Birds of Paradise over there. We don't have life totals in play like on a phone this time around, but we do have Brad's little sheet of paper that we're going to be relying on at the moment. I don't think this is going to be a very life total oriented matchup either. Right, just an island from Sean, and then we're back over to Brad. 3 mana, a Phyrexian Rager. So this will just draw Brad a card. This is something that can be looped with Cavern Harpy to just draw your whole deck for the cost of 2 life a card. And then as soon as you find something like a Soul Warden, then you can gain life and just draw your whole deck. Which is the aim of the game with the Allurin deck, to just go off infinitely and demonstrate numerous different infinite loops and do what you have to do. I think there is a Richard Cutpurse in Brad's hand, so if Sean taps out for any reason, he can lose a land if Brad wants to crack in with it. Alright, Phyrexian Ranger coming in, 18 life for Sean. What next? Playing into what is very clearly counterspell mana is really tricky. Perhaps you need to be playing something that you wouldn't mind having in play but isn't like one of the big prizes that you're trying to resolve. I think Brad's list also runs Academy Rector. I'm not 100% sure of the list. I could check it out, but it's more exciting if we enjoy it together like this. I think there's Eladamri's Call in hand as well, which can go and find the necessary pieces to combo here. That looks like a Mana War, which can be used to bounce your own Phyrexian Rager and reset it, so you get another card draw off it later on. Okay, we're going to see a Mana War here. This can bounce the Rager. It could just bounce the Birds of Paradise and just have more power on board, but it looks like we're just bouncing the Rager just to keep the cards moving and flowing on that side of the board. The turn where you want to make Sean actually commit a counterspell is when there's 4 mana open, so that you get the tempo play of them not being able to cash in something like a Fact or Fiction if they have it, which is always quite clutch. 2 damage again, so that's going to put Sean down to 16 now. And we're going to see the Rager come back down. Not really worth the interaction from Sean's point of view. And we've just got a land. So this is trying to set Sean up to spend a turn casting Wrath of God. And then hopefully Brad can get out from underneath that. Okay, the Sideways Web is not going to have text in this matchup because Brad's lands are all ones that are trying to actually produce mana because he's got a lot of colour requirements in his deck. I think he's playing 4 colours, black, blue, white, green. I don't think there's any red cards in the deck, but there's things like Mesmeric Fiend and Phyrexian Rager, and obviously Allurin is a green spell, Cavern Harpy, Mana War, and then the Mana Ramp stuff as well, and Soul Warden. Looks like there's a Cabal Therapy in Brad's hand, which is a really important spell in this matchup. Just being able to see what you're playing against is huge, and if you ever get to take any extra pieces with all the random little guys you have left over, that can work exceptionally well. Right, I think we're getting the bits in here. If this connects, it'll put Sean down to 12. That counterspell mana has been held up this entire game, and Brad's obviously going to see that and try and play around it. But what is the best way to play around it? To offer something reasonable, or just to get this Cabal Therapy off using the Birds of Paradise now, naming the counterspell, because it's very clearly going to be over there. I guess it could be a mana leak, but I think naming counterspell here would be totally fine. And obviously at this stage of the game, this is the penultimate round of Swiss. People are going to know what each other is on at the top tables. Right, looks like Brad is tapping for the Cabal Therapy. thing about Premodern is you may be using old cards, but you don't have to use the old printings. So it does make the format very accessible, and you can just slowly upgrade to the versions you like best over time if you want, while still being able to play in the tournaments. And a lot of tournaments are proxy friendly, which includes this one as well. There is the counterspell. Denying the information here, but this now gives Brad the chance to resolve a spell with the rest of the mana. So we could be seeing something like an Eladamri's Call, or even a Rishtan Cutpurse just to strip away some of the resources on Sean's side. I don't really like playing the Cutpurse out here though. I think you're more likely to want to try and get like an Eladamri's Call or like a Raven Familiar potentially, just to dig. The problem with Raven Familiar is you kind of want it when you're alluring, so if you play it, then you don't get to play it when the alluring is down. The Cabal Therapy is also in the graveyard, which means it can be flashed back next turn. Alright, we've got up to 5 mana on Sean's side of things. What is going on here? Okay, it's time to deploy the Wrath of God, which is going to strip away a lot of resources. Now, the Rager did draw 2 cards on the way, so it's not really taking that much out of Brad. Alright, this is an Eladamri's Call to go and find a creature card and put it in their hand. So not a bad way to try and assemble your pieces. What are we looking for here? Do we need to try and get back to like birds and rebuilding, or is it just Cavern Harpy, which is the thing that makes everything else go round? Now there's quite clearly a Flooded Strand open on Sean's side. That is likely to represent Swords to Plowshares. There's not going to be any nulls in game 1, so that's not really going to be a thing to play around. It's pretty much just saying I have a Swords to Plowshares over there. We've got a Sylvan Library. That's a very good card to get in underneath any sort of counter magic. Brad's Life Total is not going to be under threat at all, so we're going to be able to draw a lot of extra cards on the Alluring side. I think this particular build of Alluring looks pretty decent into blue-white control because it's got all that hand disruption, whereas you see some builds of Alluring that are just Bant, which don't have access to the hand disruption. Right, Sean is untapping. It's got a lot of mana over there. What are we doing with it is the question. There's not really going to be any urgency of trying to get a threat into play, I wouldn't imagine. It's just going to be holding up the shields all the time, trying to draw extra cards. Alright, Disenchant on the Sylvan Library. That's obviously very good. And then a pass. So there is Swords to Plowshares plus Counterspell potentially available on Sean's side for whatever Brad wants to try and muster up. Post-board, I think Brad's probably going to have things like Xanted Swarm he might be bringing in, which is definitely going to be able to swing this matchup and force removal in awkward spots. Sean gets a chance to Impulse, digging away, trying to find the next sort of piece of permission. Just keep making land drops, and then eventually you'll get in a spot where you can untap, hold up a bunch of counter magic, wait for your opponent to do something. If they do nothing, you drop the Decree of Justice in their end step to get enough guys to keep pressuring, and then all of a sudden you can put the Alluring player on the back foot and they're going to have to do something. Right, looks like we've got another Eladamri's Call in Sean's turn here. Alright, the Eladamri's Call is resolving. What are we going to add to this hand that already has the Cavern Harpy? It could just be a Mesmeric Fiend to go and check. I have a little bit of hand disruption. Mesmeric Fiend is very good with the Cabal Therapy as well. Once you have the information, then you can really name what you want. It could just be a Birds of Paradise to try and get some more mana going. It looks like what Brad's pulled to the front so far. Just making sure there's nothing else he wants instead. Right, there is the Birds of Paradise. We've got an untap and a draw. Doesn't look like he's found another land. He still seems to be stuck on the 3 land. So that makes sense trying to get the Birds of Paradise here. Does mean his hand is just full of gas though, if he's not got lands over there. We're seeing a crack of the Windswept Heath. I have to imagine we're getting a green source here, so that you have 2 green sources in your mana base to make it easier to cast Alluring even if you lose your Birds of Paradise. I don't know how many intensive white colour casts there are going to be in the deck. I don't think very many. We're looking at a wall of blossoms. Yeah, so Sean's not going to care about this, but this is just another piece of material that can draw a card. Oh wow, we are getting a counterspell on it. So this is mainly to stop it being not only just getting a card, but also being able to flash back this Cabal Therapy because it's a body that doesn't really matter to Brad. Okay, we're just cycling a Decree for a card here, not even making a single soldier. That really suggests that he wants to hit additional lands. And Brad's just taking a little look to see what's in the graveyard. And just laying out in a different order so he can sort of see it more clearly at a glance. Okay, Brad is he's found a black source as well, which is going to help, as well as the 4th mana source to make Allurin a viable thing to cast. It does look like he has a copy of Allurin. So instead he's going to try and test counter magic with this Cannon Rector. If this resolves, he can sack the Rector to the Cabal Therapy in the graveyard and then put an Allurin on the stack. So that has to be countered by Sean, which then leaves us looking at a Factual Fiction in Brad's end step. So I think Sean is ahead here. Right, resolving a Factual Fiction is a pretty big deal. As we can see, the life totals are 9 and 16. What do we got here? Not that exciting. Like the Disenchant is a way that you can stop the Allurin combo, because you wait for the Cavern Harpy to be on the stack so it can't be bounced, and then you can just blow up the Allurin. But if Brad knows that that's over there, then the Cabal Therapy naming it is going to be a relevant thing to do. The Friction Furnace doesn't necessarily seem the most important here. The Eternal Dragon is definitely a threat that can start putting a clock on this game. All right, we got the big pile has the Disenchant. I think that's an easy Disenchant pick there. So Brad has very much incentivized Sean to have the Disenchant in his hand rather than a threat. So Brad just assumes that with enough time he can find a way through with his combo with like the right amount of hand disruption using that Cabal Therapy he's already got in the bin. Here comes the Temple of the False God. This taps for 2 mana, but only if you have like 5 lands. So it's just a way of jumping from 4 to 6 with 1 land drop. And the deck that Sean's playing runs things like Akroma's Vengeance among its 6 drops. So just being able to ram that out a little turn earlier is quite nice, as well as the face-up side of Exalted Angel too. All right, what is Brad looking at doing here? There's a couple of blue cards in that hand. I can't quite make out what they are. I imagine it's probably Raven Familiar and Rishadan Cutpurse. Okay, is that Havenwood Battlegrounds? I think it might be, which is a land that can sacrifice to make 2 mana. So it just allows you to ramp out a little bit quicker. Let's see what he wants to deploy this turn. All right, 4 mana. Looks like we're just going for an Allurin. This could mean that Brad's got a second Allurin. All right, so we're resolving the Allurin. Sean can't destroy this until he gets priority, and he doesn't get priority until Brad does something. This comes in tap. That doesn't use priority. So now if Sean tries to blow this up, Brad can go off over the top. I don't like this unless Sean has a counterspell. I think you just wait on the Disenchant until you can pinch Brad. Okay, so now the Raven Familiar's come in, which is like an Anticipate, so you get to look at 3 and take 1. And then here comes a Cavern Harpy. And we're going to bounce this and redeploy it. Yeah, so I think going for the Disenchant when he did has probably cost Sean this game, because Brad can just pay a bunch of life and draw a bunch of cards until he finds what he needs. He's already got the Rishadan Cutpurse. So he's going to make Sean sacrifice 1 of his permanents unless he pays 1. And then he can just blow up all of Sean's permanents for just paying life to destroy a permanent each time, more or less. And then we're just seeing the Cutpurse again. So this is just going to shred through all of Sean's permanents. So he doesn't need to go infinite. He just needs to go enough so that Sean doesn't have any permanents left. You can just pay and just make Brad spend a bunch of life, but Brad's got enough life that he can pay enough times to sacrifice all of Sean's permanents. And that's probably going to be game if you've got no permanents left. Doesn't matter if the Allurin gets blown up here. Alright, we're seeing a Decree of Justice. This is cycling to make some guys. These are guys that can be sacrificed. Can also be guys that can maybe try and block. I'm not sure how much life Brad has got because his little pad is slightly moved off screen there. So we got 3 soldier tokens, and then one of them is dying, and then we're bouncing this and going again. So he's just basically saying, can I shortcut this to pay the X amount of life and just blow up X permanents? Yep, so that's what he's done. He's blown up all the permanents and reduced his life total a bunch. And now he's got the Raven Familiar. So if he can find a Soul Warden, he can just go infinite here and just basically play all the creatures in his deck. Okay. He's on 5 life now from all of these shenanigans. Alright, so just paying 1 life to loop the Raven Familiar, just indicating it by pointing rather than having to pick it up and play it again, because we're just trying to shortcut things here because it can be quite a lengthy combo to get through. Every Cavern Harpy he finds that he doesn't have to pay a life for just gives him another ability to draw. There is a Birds of Paradise. That's not really what he wants. Alright, I think Sean has decided that he's seen enough here. He's not going to come back from this because he's going to have enough power in play and no permanents to really impact the board. So that is going to be game 1 going in favour of Brad there. I really disliked when Sean played the disenchant there. I think you have to wait on that disenchant because Brad knows you have the disenchant. He's obviously fine with giving you the disenchant in the big pile as well. So you need to be able to try and play around that. A lot of people haven't played against Alurin either, so it's definitely something that can get you. I think where the point is for that one, you have to wait until a Cavern Harpy goes on the stack and then disenchant, because otherwise they can just keep looping stuff. So I think that's probably the best way of doing it. And if Brad doesn't do anything and you untap and draw a card, maybe draw a counterspell and you just have an extra line of defense. All right, let's see what they're sideboarding here. I imagine Brad might be doing things like Xantid Swarm and such, and then Sean's going to want some sort of like annuls and then maybe getting rid of the Zabo's Webs. All right, we're drawing opening hands now for the second game. Brad's got a Soul Warden over there, and I think there's a Raven Familiar. Can't really make out the other cards. Not sure what Sean has access to. I see some blue spells and some white spells. So probably some number of disenchants and some counter magic. Leading off on a Coastal Tower and passing over to Brad. What is Brad going to go for here? It looks like a Phyrexian Tower, which is to enable the sacrificing of the Academy Rector more easily. Is there no Birds of Paradise this time around though? So what's Sean got to follow up here? A Flooded Strand and a Pass Back. Okay, we've got cracking of the Flooded Strand. Sorry, not the Flooded Strand, the Windswept Heath on Brad's side of things. Getting a basic forest. Nice choice of an Onslaught basic forest, I believe. Not necessarily the Onslaught basics I use, but they're still very nice. We've got the Phyrexian Tower, so we could be seeing like a Wall of Blossoms here. Okay, Sylvan Library, just straight into counterspell mana. Looks like we're going to just push through. Alternatively, this could just soak up a disenchant as well. Sean is going to get an island at the end step. I think we're going to see either something like an Impulse or a disenchant here. Because you don't need to spend a counterspell on a Sylvan Library when you have a disenchant, because the counterspell can hit anything. And, okay, no, it is just a counterspell, it was just in response to it. Okay. That suggests that there's no disenchant in Sean's hand, because you'd much rather counterspell an Alurin than disenchant it, because your opponent can play over the top of a disenchant, as he's already seen. So there's some information that Brad can get. So this is a Meddling Mage, which can name Alurin. That says Alurin on that piece of paper, so we know about that. This is obviously going to be a little bit annoying for Brad. I'm not sure how much removal he's going to realistically have in his deck, against the control deck especially. So this might prove a slightly challenging one, but there's going to be answers somewhere. He's got Eladamri's Call. He's got the Mana War, which can bounce it as well. So there's definitely lines here. All right, we're just getting the bird in, doing some Raven Familiar action. What are we finding? It can be any card as well. It doesn't have to find a particular type of card. So it's just like a nice little anticipate. Get deeper into the deck. Alurin's not really a great draw right now. You're going to need to fire in a Mana War and have the mana to play it. But he doesn't need to hardcast the Alurin. He can just put it into play via a Academy Rector and then use the Phyrexian Tower to sacrifice it. Alternatively, a Cabal Therapy can sacrifice it too. Right, the Raven Familiar is going to die anyway, so it just soaks up a couple of points. That makes a lot of sense. Alright, I think Brad's got one of those Havenwood Battlegrounds again. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. It comes in tapped. It taps for green, or you can sack it and add green. Okay. Have we got any other follow-up here? There is a Cabal Therapy here. So what I think Brad's plan for this game is to set up a situation where he can Cabal Therapy and then play a Rector in Cabal Therapy and just pop off in response. The amount of the amount of discard spells that Brad can find is definitely going to make the matchup a little bit easier. But there's probably going to be quite a bit of this game left to play. This Impulse is taking Sean a little bit of time to work out exactly which one he wants. But he's made himself a decision here. And he's untapping. So he's going to be able to start getting some actual damage in now. There's no blockers here. So Brad drops down to 17. And it's a pass. No land drop from Sean, which means his hand is stacked full of gas. But doesn't necessarily have the lands to deploy them all. Which is a choke point that Brad can try and take advantage of. Because if he can fire him with discard spells, there's only so many counter spells that Sean can reply with. While he's only got 4 mana up. What was that he's drawing? It looks like maybe a Mesmeric Fiend. That will cost him a counter off of his Gemstone Mine to get that going. Right, he's opting for something else instead. Is this just going to be like a guy that doesn't matter that much? Yeah, so it's a Raven Familiar. This isn't going to be good enough to warrant a counterspell, but it's going to allow him to sculpt. It's a bit like in other formats like Legacy, where you spend a bunch of turns sometimes with your ponders and your brainstorms in like a deck, like Ad Nauseam Tendrils, where you just build up a hand that's going to beat the control deck. He's kind of trying to do a similar-ish thing here, but using Raven Familiars. But there does come a point where the Raven Familiars, if he spends too many of them now, he won't be able to use them later on when he's trying to combo. But if he's already got the requisite pieces, he doesn't need it. Like if he's got Soul Warden, Cavern Harpy, and Rishadan Cutpurse, that's enough to blow up all of Sean's permanents. And we have already seen Eladamri's Call, so he's got a relatively strong amount of ability to find the cards he wants when he's popping off. Alright, there is a Soul Warden in his hand, so he's got that part of the combo. Okay, so he's just sacrificing this straight away for black mana. I think we might be seeing a Cabal Therapy here, or a Mesmeric Fiend, one of the two. Alright, a third mana. Nope, we might be doing something completely different. Alright, we're doing a Mesmeric Fiend, but leaving a black in the pool. Right, so there is a counter spell on the Mesmeric Fiend. What a great card Mesmeric Fiend is. Okay, so Mana Leak is available on Sean's side, but that's it. Like, it's that or Disenchant sort of things. I think he's relatively likely to fire off a Cabal Therapy. Yep, here it comes. Once he knows what Sean is working with, it makes it a lot easier to form a game plan. That's why Hand Disruption is so powerful. Like, yes, you can't Thoughtseize the top of someone's deck or whatever, or Duress the top of their deck. But getting all the information about what's in your opponent's hand is huge. Especially when you're a combo deck and you're trying to find your way through what they have. If you know what they have, it's way easier. Right? Sean is thinking quite hard about this one. He can Mana Leak here. Okay, it looks like it's resolving by the player's posture. Alright. Brad is asking how many cards. He's trying to work out what to name here. What has he named? Doesn't look like he's named any of the cards in hand, but we can see a Counterspell, an Impulse, a Fact or Fiction, and can't quite make out that last card, but hopefully Brad will write it down for us. No, not quite sure what that last card is. Alright, we've got an end of turn Impulse here. I think Sean is in a pretty solid spot here. If that Cabal Therapy had hit something and maybe taken up on the resources, it could be awkward, but he's got Counterspell, and if he doesn't need his Counterspell, he can Fact or Fiction, and that is going to be a lot of cards that he's going to be popping into his grip there. He gets the selection because he gets to choose whichever one he wants the most in theory, depending on how the piles get set up. Right, Meddling Mage coming in, 15 life for Brad. Sorry, 14 life. Just a little discrepancy with life totals there. And he's untapping. He's got quite a lot of mana to work with here, and the Phyrexian Tower can produce 2, as can the Haven with Battlegrounds. So this could be 7 or 8 mana this turn, and like a big flurry of spells. There's an Eladamri's Call in Brad's hand, which probably needs to go and get the Academy Rector, because I don't know if he's going to be able to get this Meddling Mage out of play. Certainly not whilst playing the Allurant at the same time. Okay, the Gemstone Mine is being thrown away. This is probably going to be for a black spell. Is this just another Mesmeric Fiend? Looks like it. Is this worth a counter spell to Sean or not? Looks like there's a Swords to Plowshares in Sean's hand, possibly 2. Right, we're impulsing in response, taking a point of pain so we can leave up blue for counter spells. Right, that was quite a quick selection. What does that mean? Right, we're just counter spelling that. So what is Brad's next move here? Just passing the turn. By forcing Sean to play a spell there, he doesn't get to try and convert this Fact or Fiction. Because once he gets the Fact or Fiction in, it's going to be a lot of extra cards. Once he's getting additional cards each turn. Okay, we're doing an end of turn Eladamri's Call. We saw this in the previous game. It's like a really good way of trying to force your opponent to tap out. Okay, we've got a Mana Leak. So now there's only 2 mana available, and it's not of Counterspell colour, but of Mana Leak colour. This tells Brad that there's not a Counterspell in Sean's hand. It could be a Mana Leak, but not an actual factual Counterspell. Right? Because the Counterspell, we saw one used earlier that we knew about, and you would definitely leave open blue if that's what you had in your hand. Right, in comes the Meddling Mage down to 10. Impacting Brad's life total does matter for the purposes of doing the loops with the Cavern Harpy, but if you've got the Soul Ward, it doesn't matter. Okay, so now Sean gets to convert the Fact or Fiction. What are we seeing here? We've got Angel, Disenchant, and Decree. I do love like navigating Fact or Fiction piles. It's a really cool, interesting way of interacting with a draw spell. And there's so many different pieces of information that you can set up for your opponent depending on how you arrange the piles. Lands versus spells. So Brad seems to be trying to bottleneck Sean on being able to cast spells. Okay, so Sean's gone for the bigger pile, which has a bunch of spells. So there is a disenchant, which is something that Brad's going to have to play around. We've already seen him do that a little bit, but I think that was partly because Sean prematurely fired it off when maybe he could have waited a couple of turns or waited for Brad to put something on the stack and find a choke point. Sean found himself a land, and now they've dropped a Exalted Angel into play. They're getting 2 more damage in. Okay, there is a Swords to Plowshares from Brad here. That's going to gain Sean some life. But more importantly, it's going to free up Alluring as a thing that can be cast now. Sean's Meddling Mage is in the graveyard when it's supposed to be exiled, but I don't think that's going to matter here. This isn't really a sort of matchup where that actually counts. I think both players have missed that. But that's fine. If it starts to impact something, I'm sure they'll suddenly remember it. No play for Brad, though. He did remove the Meddling Mage, but couldn't quite convert on it by playing an Alluring. Right, just 2 damage from the Angel. Doesn't need to flip yet. It can flip at the end of Brad's turn and be a 2-turn clock. Which is, okay, just not even flipping it. Just holding up the counter magic. Just making sure nothing goes wrong and just getting the beats in. That's a very defensive posture. I wonder what he's worried about. Like an Eladamri's Call, perhaps? If he taps out, then he won't be able to counterspell it. But he could have flipped up the Angel last turn. But we do know he's got a Mana Leak. We've peeked that from his hand. So he just wants to make sure that he's always got counter magic up, I guess. Okay, so he's flipping up now. Maybe he just missed it and he should have flipped up at the end of the last turn then. Right, here comes a Swords to Plowshares from Brad. That's a pretty strong one here. But now Sean is very much shields down. This is definitely a gateway for Brad to win this game this turn. He's only got 3 cards in hand though, and he does need a critical mass of resources to start popping off. There is a Temple of the False Gods. A Meddling Mage on Alluring is very, very strong here. Brad's already gone through 2 of his plows. He's unlikely to have another in hand at this point. What have we got? A Reflecting Pool. Lots of mana, but nowhere to go with it. Okay, so we've got a little Decree of Justice by the looks of things. So this is going to make 2 friends because the Temple of the False God taps for 2. Had to take a pain off of the Temple of the False God, but that's not really what this game is about. So I think Brad is on 8. So this is a 2-turn clock by making that Decree for 2. Makes sense. Another land. So accessing all this permission in Sean's hand should be pretty good. I don't think Bradley has a way through this one. Okay, Cabal Therapy is not a bad start. What do you name here? I think you name... do you name Mana Leak? Do you name the Disenchant you know about? There's another Meddling Mage. Okay, he would just want to have a look so we get more information to see if there's any interesting sideboard cards over there. I like that a lot. Let's go to the last game and see who can take this one down and secure a spot in the top 8. Alright, we are drawing our opening hands now. What have we got? Brad being on the place certainly helps him out here. Looks like Brad is on a 6. And Sean is on a 7. We're going to start with the Birds of Paradise. We are starting with something for 1 mana. It could be the Soul Warden. Okay, if it's a forest, it's almost certainly going to be the Birds of Paradise, which is a really important piece of glue for Brad's deck because it allows him to just actually cast all of his spells across this multitude of colours that he's running. Right, so there it is. And now we're seeing just an island and a pass back. This is a good turn for Brad to get something stuck in like a Mesmeric Fiend. And just get the information about the hand and turn on all the Cabal Therapies to just be absolute snipers. There is a Cabal Therapy in hand, so I think we might be seeing that this turn. What would you name here, though? Would you name the Annul as like a cheap answer that they've definitely brought in, or do you just name Counterspell because you know there's going to be 4 in your opponent's deck? And it's the sort of thing that they would keep their hand on. Okay, there is an Annul there. Temple of the False God, Decree of Justice, a couple of lands. Can't quite make out the other cards. Let's hopefully try and read. Okay, so an Impulse is one of the other ones. Thank you, Brad, for writing that down with handwriting that I can read. Appreciate it. It's better than my handwriting, that's for sure. Yep, so just a bunch of lands and then 3 spells. Okay, there's an Eladamri's Call in Brad's hand that he's probably going to use to move things along next turn. Or for next turn, I should say. There's your Darker Waste we knew about. Has to just assume that Sean has nothing here and you can just sort of jam. It's just going to be the annul. Okay, he did draw a counter spell. That's a good exchange for Sean there. Then Brad gets to untap and draw for turn. What are we looking at? I think there's a white card there, which might be the Soul Warden. Okay, we've just got a Raven Familiar. This will replace itself, but they're not really going to be wanting to pay the Echo. So it's not really replacing itself as much as it is just a... It's not getting card advantage is what I mean. It's just going to be a cantrip. So it replaces itself, but doesn't leave a body around. It might get Cabal Therapy this turn and be the food for that, unless Brad wants to save the Cabal Therapy for an Academy Rector. Okay, he doesn't need to do that now. He could also sack the Raven Familiar to get the mana to cast like a Mesmeric Fiend this turn. Okay, I think that's a Swords to Plowshares in Brad's hand. He might actually be paying for this Raven Familiar looking at his hand and just trying to get a few little cheap shots of damage in. Can't quite make out the second card that Brad has. It's a white card though. Okay, we are paying for the Raven Familiar, which is not a sign of strength, I don't think. In comes the Raven Familiar. It's just 1 damage. It's not really a big deal. There's another Birds of Paradise. The problem is Sean does run Wrath of God. So running into that could be very scary here. So Brad has kept the Birds of Paradise in his hand. He doesn't need the mana right now. But having something to rebuild with after losing his Birds of Paradise to like a Wrath makes a lot of sense why he would keep that. And a Darker Wastes. Okay, so there is the Wrath that Brad has played around by keeping this Birds of Paradise in hand. Sean's going to take a point of damage for that. And then Brad loses a couple of creatures. Now one of them did replace itself, so it's not a great loss of cards. But it's just a bit of a setback. Here is a Sylvan Library. That is a very nice follow-up, especially knowing that the Annul is in hand. Finding a spot to resolve that is kind of huge. Temple of the False Gods, that's now 6 mana. So we could be seeing like Decrees for 3, and that actually provides a real clock. But note, we're seeing a Seal of Cleansing to take out the Sylvan Library. That is not really what Brad wants to see there. I think he would have happily spent 8 life to get 2 more cards as well off of the library if it was around. Okay, we've got a Windswept Teeth being cracked. I have to imagine this is going to be for a second green source, so that Allurin is more castable. Yep, there it is. Now there's still a Cabal Therapy sat in Brad's graveyard, and there was also this Phyrexian Tower, so there could be like a little extra jump in mana, or a little bit of disruption of hand. But does he have enough resources to go off, even if he can stick an Allurin? Okay, looks like he's going for oh, it's a Rector, because he knows that the Annul is in hand. So this just works. I don't think he's in a position to try and combo off though, but maybe he is. Alright, so the Cabal Therapy has got the Rector trigger on the stack, so he has to hope that Sean doesn't have access to a Disenchant here. But this is where the information he got earlier on from that first Cabal Therapy is huge, because he knows that Sean had the Annul. Okay, so Brad has taken the Decree, which suggests that Brad doesn't have the win right now. He just needs to buy a bit more time and take this little window to get an Allurin in and see if it can do its work. I think he's got a Birds of Paradise and a Swords to Plowshare, so he's just taken the opportunity to take Sean off of a threat and buy himself a few more draw steps, as well as playing around that Annul. This is a little bit risky in case of a Disenchant coming his way, but maybe that's not too much of an issue here. Okay, we're seeing something big. It's the Eternal Dragon. That is quite the clock. Okay, Brad is going to flash in his Birds of Paradise. Got himself a Swords to Plowshares. Just going to immediately fire it off on this Eternal Dragon. Get rid of it forever. Yep, so they've caught it this time because this is a card that actually matters. So they've noticed it this time, unlike they did with the Meddling Mage in the previous game. Because both players are aware that there is a clock on this game. Because, you know, you only get a certain amount of minutes on your round. And both of these decks can take a while to pop off and do their thing. So they're just trying to play relatively quickly. Right, the bottom card of the library. And then they're sacrificing the Phyrexian Furnace as well here. A Raven Familiar is probably a really good start here. I think there's a Cavern... Is that Cavern Harpy? Can't quite make out what's in Brad's hand. Is that just another Swords to Plowshares? Okay. This is a huge deal here. Getting the Fact or Fiction off. If it finds an answer to the Allurin, this could be huge. Right, so we're going to separate the 2 spells. Okay, it's a threat plus answers. And Sean is correctly identifying that this is about getting a threat down before Brad can combo off, and then Brad also recognises that. So it's like, if you want the threat, you don't get anything to go with it. Brad has highlighted the annul in big letters as like the important thing that's left that he knows about. We're just getting the angel in, holding up blue. What is Brad going to find this time? That looks like a Raven Familiar to me. That is a big hit here. If this resolves and finds a Cavern Harpy, I think it's game over. Or at least quite likely to be game over. 4 mana. This is Academy Rector. It is Academy Rector. I don't know if there's like a weird thing that you can find with it. Interesting that you would counterspell the Rector and not the Familiar. If you're just trying to get the tempo. Because this Raven Familiar is also going to buy a turn because it's going to be able to block. Unless Brad wants to keep it around for the purposes of being able to bounce it with a Cavern Harpy. Yeah, he probably just takes the damage here, actually. Okay. Looks like we're going back to Brad. He's probably going to pay for this Raven Familiar. That dice might be turns on the round. Time, yeah, turns at the end of the round because time has been called. Let's see. That looks like a Cavern Harpy to me. So if this Mesmeric Fiend clears the way... Okay, he's bouncing it to permanently remove the card. Okay, taking one of the annuls. Now he doesn't need to care about anything. He can just play this, take the other one. You just pay a life and then do this whole song and dance. And then Sean is just out of resources now. Alright, here comes the Raven Familiar. And that looks like a Soul Warden to me. Play Soul Warden, and then every time he does this, it doesn't cost him any life. So he can just draw his entire deck now. Doesn't really matter how he approaches this. This game is over. He's going to Rishtan Cutpurse all of the permanents on the other side of the battlefield. He can also gain infinite life once he finds the Mana War. Yeah. So he's picking it up, and that is it. So Brad can probably ID in the next round, and I know for a fact he does because he ID'd with me for the last round. So that's locked his top 8 spot, and Sean needs to win it in his next round, I believe. All right, that is the end of the round. All right, we are into the final round of the Swiss. On the left, we have Armand, who is playing a blue-white control deck, very similar to what Sean was playing in the previous round. On the right, we have Will, who is playing Dreadnought, who was undefeated until he lost to my Jund deck in round 5, I think it was, which now means he has to... He could have ID'd this round, but Armand couldn't. So Will might be able to lose and still make top 8 in 8th place, but we'll see what happens here. Right, Will has mulliganed a fair bit here. Not a great start for him on this one. Looks like he's keeping a 5-card hand. Unfortunately, neither of the players here decided to put up life totals. This is thankfully a matchup where life total is not really relevant because it's just either the control player is in ascendancy and has control and the game just sort of ends, or the Dreadnought player is killing their opponent with Dreadnoughts. Speaking of Dreadnought, here one is. This looks like a turn 1 Dreadnought with foil backup. Vision Charm. So we're going to have a mana leak on the Vision Charm, and now we're dazing that. So the Dreadnought is being put upside down to represent that it is phased out. Now it's over to Armand. He can't remove this Dreadnought until it gets to William's turn. Alright, just a Coastal Tower there. Swords to Plowshares in the upkeep. This is going to be a foil, pitching the whole of William's hand here. In for 12. So that puts Armand down to 8. Like I said, I don't think the actual life totals being written down in front of you are going to be that helpful. Just how many hits of Dreadnought are left to kill your opponent. If the Dreadnought sideways, it's just one more. A Swords to Plowshares here probably undoes the entire game. Alright, Wrath of God. Okay, so William over here is in a big spot of bother. Managed to get Armand down with 1 hit, but getting these last 8 points of damage through this stacked hand of the blue-white control player is going to be a challenging prospect, I would imagine. This was on a mull to 5 for William here. He could have had an extra couple of cards in hand if he didn't have to mulligan. Looks like Armand is leading off with an Exalted Angel. That's going to be able to gain enough life to put the hits of the Phyrexian Dreadnought out of range. 2 hits of this Angel will mean that there'll be 2 hits required to win the game using the Dreadnought. And every extra turn that it takes for the Dreadnought to kill gives the blue-white player more time to cantrip and find an answer to it. I don't think Armand can just flip this yet, but maybe he doesn't care enough about what's in Will's hand. But I think he can just flip it in Will's end step and just hold up permission. Right, we're getting a powder keg. This is a really good answer for things like Phyrexian Dreadnought. Just drawing a card and passing back. William is in a bit of a pickle here, I think. Right, in the end step, we've got an accumulated knowledge from Armand here. There we go. Put the old AK in the grave here. And now we're going to see just another 2 damage come across. This is going to put Will down to 16. I will keep track of the live totals for you. I'm not going to put them up on the screen. Alright, so now at the end step, we're going to spend some mana to flip this guy. I think that's the correct play for Armand there. This is not something that could be interacted with using a stifle because it's a special action. Because that's the only way that you could write it so it would work with the card being hidden and not be like this weird thing where you kind of have to know what it is without knowing what it is. Alright, we're back over to Armand. This is going to put Will down to 12. So only 3 more hits of this angel will be enough. Do we have a land on Armand's side? Looks like it. I expect it's just going to be land go. There's an answer to Dreadnought kicking around over there. Okay, Flash of Insight where X equals 1. This is just 3 mana, draw 1 card. Not a particularly great rate. And then we're passing back again. The powder keg is staying at 1. That's the number it needs to be at. 4 comes across into Will yet again. So that's going to put him down to 8. Okay, an AK. Because Armand played an AK, that AK is worth 2 cards to Will, which is a pretty big deal. That's going to allow him to gas back up again. But Armand has secured a decent chunk of life now. Okay, I think this puts Will to dead on board, if my math is correct here. And now we're going to see this Flash of Insight getting rid of, including the AK here. So this is going to make Armand's AKs worse as well. It's basically a super impulse. All right, Will's had enough, and he's decided that that is the end of that game. And we're going quite swiftly to game number 2. I think in terms of sideboarding, Will is probably going to bring in Brain Freeze here and have a Storm Wind condition. So if it gets like really grindy, yeah, the 2 Brain Freeze are the first things here. There's also some Powder Kegs to deal with Meddling Mage. And I think that's probably going to be it. On the other side, we might be looking at a Null. We might be looking at more removal if there's any over there. I don't know if there's going to be reprisals or anything. And that sort of jazz. Meddling Mage, very good into the Dreadnought deck as well. And that's probably what we're working with. Oh, there's also a Dominate over there on Will's side. We are now at the drawing opening hand stage for game number 2. After plenty of shuffling, it looks like Will is on 6, but Armand is on 7. Will is beginning with an island, and we've got a pass. Just an island from Armand. At the end step, we're seeing a peek from Will to see if the coast is clear to do a Dreadnought plan. So we've got a bunch of lands. That's a Disenchant and a Counterspell and an Annul, I believe that other card is. So the Annul is pretty important here, because that means that he's got some recourse into a Dreadnought this turn. And if that doesn't work due to daze or whatever on Will's part, then he can just untap and fire and Disenchant. So it's going to be difficult for Will to get through this, I would imagine. But there's probably a lot of game to play. Okay, he could have fired in a Dreadnought here just to get the Annul out of the hand because he's got 2 Dreadnoughts. Just use it as like a duress. He doesn't actually have the piece to go with the Dreadnought this turn, but he could have just fired it because I think that Annul immediately gets fired on the Dreadnought. Okay, we've got a land and a pass from Armand, and then we're over on Will looking at a Portent here. We're seeing a Dominate and a Stifle. The Stifle is obviously very good at going with the Dreadnought, but how useful is the Dreadnought plan going to be here against the control deck? We know Armand's got an Annul. We know he's got a Disenchant. There's so many ways in which this Dreadnought is not going to be good enough right now. So I don't think Will even wants to be trying to win with Dreadnought. He just wants to drag it out and hit those 2 Brain Freezes in his deck. Problem is, if Meddling Mage can come down and name Dreadnought with the first one and then name Brain Freeze with the second one, that's going to put Will in a real predicament here. Because he's not very good at cleaning stuff off the board. He's just got a couple of Powder Kegs and maybe some sort of bounce spell like Chain of Vapor. Drawing off the portent. It's now in Armand's main phase. We're just getting a nice little coastal tower down and passing, I think. Or are we going to play a meddling mage here? Just to pass. A nice little island there. And a portent. Portent can actually target either player, which is interesting. There is an accumulated knowledge, a dominate, and a powder keg. The powder keg can be used as a way of dealing with a meddling mage later on. The dominate stealing the meddling mage doesn't change what it's named, but it does mean that you're the one with the threat, and eventually the control player has to destroy the meddling mage. Okay. Is Will drawn from his portent here? Just drawn from his portent. What is Armand doing with his turn? Playing a land and passing. I think we're going to see a lot of that. Okay, the first AK is not the one you want to be casting, because that means your opponent is going to have all of their AKs doing more work. Okay, it looks like Will is going to deploy the powder keg at this point. Alright, we just got to pass. That is a plains. And... okay, floating 2 and gushing. This is a good place to be. This is probably going to be a Dreadnought turn just to get some cards out of both players' hands. Alright, an impulse using the floating mana. This powder keg was left on 1. Was left on 0, not going up to 1. Which is quite interesting. Is it time to Dreadnought? Or are we looking at keeping a hand and discarding some stuff? Okay, so there's 2 extra cards that the Gush drew are actually just going to be going into the graveyard right now. Surely you just want to fire in one of your Dreadnoughts. If you're going to discard one anyway, just fire one in and see if your opponent reacts to it. Because you might get the annul for free there. Alright, just keeping the Dreadnought in hand, I think. Just keeping both Dreadnoughts. Alright, if you're going to keep both Dreadnoughts, then that makes sense. A Phyrexian Furnace, this is going to shave down the accumulated knowledges. It's also going to shave down the possibility of Flash of Insight seeing more cards. Over on Will's side, what we're looking at. Just playing a land. Is it time to deploy a Dreadnought? We know there's like a million answers over there. I don't hate just playing one here and seeing if it gets a spell from the opponent. Alright, here we go. I think this is just going to get a clean annul. There it is. I would be tempted to just let this go if I was Will, because we know there's also a disenchant on the other side. Just take it as a bad duress, or a good duress, because I guess they spend the mana as well. Okay, we're foiling this, putting a counter spell as well. And a second annul. Yeah. So now Will is very low on resources, but Armand doesn't have a clock, so he's got time to just build up his Dreadnought hand again. I don't think Dreadnought is the way to win this game. Be interesting to see how it pans out for him though. You want to save your Vision Charms for protecting your creature from removal, or milling your opponent for 4 cards, which is a very relevant piece of text here. Because the game plan against Blue-White Control was often just fire off 4 Vision Charms into Brain Freeze. An impulse from Armand's side. There's going to be a lot of back and forth and sculpting hands in this particular game. The majority of what's happening is going to be happening in our players' hands and not on the board. The amount of lands they have up each moment of this game is probably the most important thing. It doesn't really matter like the creatures. Like this powder keg isn't going to be doing the most. It means that you can't play out a Exalted Angel as a morph if you're in Armand's seat, because the powder keg can just clean it up. However, if he's got the mana to play it, he can then just play it as a 6-drop, or he can play it as a 3-drop, wait for the keg to pop, and then morph it in response so it doesn't die. Alright, we're seeing an AK here. Does Armand want to exile the AK in Will's graveyard using this Furnace? Or does Will get to draw 2 cards? Alright, Will just gets to draw 2 cards. I would consider having the Phyrexian Furnace, but I don't know how many AKs that Armand has himself, so he might just be trying to leverage these AKs later on. If the I can't remember if the bottom card of Will's graveyard is a accumulated knowledge, because he did fire one off quite a long time ago. Alright, Armand is getting another island out. Very different personal approaches of these 2 players. We've got sort of the energetic youth of William over here, and the sort of deliberate grace of age with Armand, who's a bit older than Will. Because I think Will's still at university. I was chatting to him at the event. Nice to see some youngsters getting into Boomer Magic, right? Now we're back over with Armand. If the bottom card of William's graveyard is the AK, do you fire off the furnace here or not? Okay, that takes the AK out. So he really is just using it as a way of stopping the Flash of Insight from doing its job. Okay, so now that powder keg is going up because this powder keg wants to blow up the other powder keg. Just keg on keg violence right here. Okay, we're going back to Armand. Lots of draw go here. Powder keg is going up to 1. The Phyrexian Furnace is eating away at Will's graveyard. Here comes an Impulse. I don't think this is one that Armand's going to fight over. Nope, just lets it go. This whole game is about just waiting and waiting and waiting. That AK is pretty good here. It's going to draw 2 cards again. Again, the option is to make it to draw 1 card using this Phyrexian Furnace. It decides to just let it go and give Will the extra card. So now the keg is on 2, so it can blow up the opposing keg whenever. Doesn't need to go off anytime soon though. Can wait and just keep a Meddling Mage out of play with it. Okay, so here is the decree. Looks like Will is ready to hit the trigger of the decree with a stifle. So the way this works is when you cycle it, a trigger goes on the stack and then you pay with the trigger. So you have to stifle it before your opponent pays. So this is just trying to stifle to keep all these little soldier tokens out of play and buy more time. I don't think this is something that Armand's going to fight over because he is trading up here because he's cycling this card. So he's going to end up with another card back. And it's probably just going to be a bit of an attrition battle. So it looks like he's just letting it go and drawing his card. You can stifle the card draw if you would prefer that as well. But clearly stopping all these little 1/1s getting into play is a big deal. The Phyrexian Furnace is eating again. I wonder how many cards are going to end up in exile this game. Probably a huge amount. We've got an accumulated knowledge for 3 this time. Just a casual 2-mana Ancestral Recall. Not too shabby. Alright. Mana Leak has been pointed at this one. If Armand has been sandbagging a bunch of accumulated knowledges, this can go really, really well. Okay, another Vision Charm. That is actually what Will wants here. He just wants to keep this game ticking along, making sure there's no threats coming along, letting Armand naturally draw a bunch of cards from his deck, and then wait till he gets the Brain Freeze and then just go big. I don't think you fight over this Fact or Fiction at all. I think this just gets to happen. It's going to mill 5 effectively and bring Will closer. What are we going to see here? That looks like an opt. Does Will want to keep this one? Alright, he is just putting it into his hand. Is he going to counterspell his Fact or Fiction? He is. Okay. Are we just picking a fight here to try and thin out some resources to make sure he doesn't have to go to clean up in the future? Alright. Just the 1-for-1 trade there, and we're back over with Armand, who's going to continue to fire this Phyrexian Furnace with cards from Will's graveyard. Just a very slow game here. It'd be interesting to know if both players are fully aware what it's about. I think Will is very clear with what this game is about in terms of the Brain Freeze combo that he's going for. And Armand has attempted to put some pressure into play a little bit early on, so it does feel like he knows that there is a clock on this game, which is how many cards are left in his library. So it's going to be very hard to answer a Brain Freeze, because I don't think he's got access to anything like a Stifle. Now, there are Meddling Mages over there, but the Meddling Mages aren't going to be very good while the Powder Keg's around. So maybe you could tick up the Powder Keg that he's got to then blow up the Powder Keg to get the Meddling Mage in. Both players just examining graveyard and exile zones, seeing how many accumulated knowledges are around. It does get to a point sometimes where casting a big AK from the blue-white control side is detrimental to winning the game, as weird as that is. That looks like another Stifle, which is another answer to a Decree of Justice, which is exactly where Will wants to be here. Just making sure that there's no threats happening. Just absolutely prolong this game. Is that a second Dreadnought or is that a Powder Keg? Might be a Powder Keg, actually. So that's an answer to another threat. Okay, so Armand has decided to tick up the powder keg. So this is to get rid of the powder keg to enable things like the meddling mage to come into play. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this powder keg pop now and a meddling mage get dropped. Yeah, looks like we're popping the keg and then playing another one. Stifle is something that can hit the keg as well, which is important to note. Just wanted to have keg supremacy on board. We've got another island played out by Will. Kind of interesting playing it out when foil is in the deck and doesn't actually have an island in hand. He wouldn't have to go to discard if he kept that island, so I'd be interested in maybe keeping hold of that for now, unless I've miscounted his hand. Yeah, it looks like he's got 6 cards. We could have held on to that for 1 turn. Although he's got the Gush, which is a good way to put islands back, so actually, ignore me, I didn't see the Gush. That makes that very sensible. Okay. Libraries are slowly getting thinned out as the game progresses. The powder keg is ticking up to 1, which I imagine is where it's going to stay for now. You can just stay there and cover the Dreadnought and then maybe tick up if required later on. The Phyrexian Furnace continues to gobble up cards. And we're back in the old draw-go pattern. There's another Gush here. So the Gushes are going to be really useful in a big go turn, potentially, with a Brain Freeze. Because free spells are a good way of generating Storm. Looks like the Phyrexian Furnace is eating a foil this time. I'm not sure how close it is to eating an accumulated knowledge. I'm sure that's coming along soon enough. Okay, looks like we're doing a Gush turn here. And we've got an island being played out. Do you play out this Dreadnought to make use? Like, it doesn't seem like the Dreadnought's very good at all. Right, we are just going to clean up here. Although if Armand wants to cast any spells, he needs to do it before the cleanup happens. Is that getting rid of 2 stifles? Getting rid of both of the stifles is kind of interesting when we've already identified that what Will wants to make sure doesn't happen is threats coming into play, and the stifle can stop the Decree of Justice making guys. So the bottom card of Will's graveyard right now is an accumulated knowledge. So the next time this furnace activates, it's going to make a difference. Obviously, it's just been chugging away and stripping out the value of a Flash of Insight so far, but it can do a lot more than that by taking out an accumulated knowledge and actually denying Will an extra card. Just many manners on both sides. Players staring at each other. This is just good old-fashioned Boomer magic right here. I think the last time I can remember a standard format that was even remotely like this was like Return to Ravnica standard. That was one where there was a lot of just draw-go, people trying to thread in Sphinx's Revelations. So it's been a long time for younger players to even sort of contemplate this sort of game where nothing is really happening on the board. It's all happening in terms of the resources that they're managing in their hands. This is a really cool play pattern. Not for everyone. Okay, there's 3 Vision Charms there in Will's hand. That's a big deal. We are just letting this game drag on and on and on until we just pop it and the game ends. Alright, here's a Portent. Okay, find a Brain Freeze. There is a Brain Freeze. That is big news here. So what he's probably going to do is just keep waiting because he doesn't need to do anything. He can just let Armand play his cards out. Sort of just move on with that whole plan. And then as soon as he's under threat or Armand puts a few spells on the stack, then he can just fire off a flurry of Vision Charms, counter spells, and finish off with a Brain Freeze. And that's going to be really good. And should be enough to end this game. I reckon there's, 30 odd cards left in Armand's library. There's like 11 lands. That graveyard looks like about 10 cards and another 7. Alright, we've got a Gush here. Are we going for a line this turn? It needs Storm of like 10, but every one of these he casts costs less Storm. So this looks like it's going to try and mill Armand. And if Armand fights over it, it gets really awkward. There's still 2 blue in the pool. We've entered the Vision Charm your opponent to death stage of the game, which is really cool. Okay, another accumulated knowledge, 2 accumulated knowledges, and an Eternal Dragon. I suspect we're going to see another one. There's still this 2 mana floating that he can use. Okay, he's going to use the floating mana this time. Here is a Dreadnought. This is just to try and get some spells out of Armand. This isn't actually a Dreadnought he wants to resolve or do anything with. He doesn't care about this. He's just letting it go as a spell. Here comes another Vision Charm. So we've had Gush, Vision Charm, Dreadnought. So that's 4 at the moment. So 4 times 3 is 12. And then we've also got this. So this is going to be 15. Do you have any 1 mana spell? No. So it's Brainstorm. So it's, what, 15, like 18 cards? I think it ends up being here. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So this is probably going to leave Armand with 1 card in his library. He might fire some counter spells at copies of Brain Freeze. Alright, there's 1. Okay, here is a Thwart. You have to assume this is happening after the Storm triggers have resolved. There is a counter spell. And there's another counter spell. So is this 4 copies or 5 copies that go through? 1, 2, 3. That's 1 copy. That's a 2nd copy. 3rd copy. 4th copy. 5th copy. Okay, there was 5 copies that went through in the end, I believe. Will's kind of shot his shot there. It's a case of how many win conditions are left in Armand's deck. Because if he's milled all the win conditions here, he's kind of toasty. Now, there is an Eternal Dragon here. Does he have enough time to buy back the Eternal Dragon and start sending it sideways? Will is still on 20 life. Both players... Actually, I don't know if both players are on 20 life because Armand has got some lands with pain abilities on, like the Adaka Waste. So maybe doesn't have them. All right, we're going to be buying back the Eternal Dragon in the upkeep here. Is there going to be enough time for Armand to win the game with this Eternal Dragon before he mills out? If Will just draws a Brain Freeze, he might just be able to win this game that way. Just take those last few cards. Another Vision Charm can also do it. And I think if Armand had additional counter spells, he would have used them then to buy more turns. Will also gets to look at the deck and see what things have been brought in. Okay, 2 decrees down in the graveyard, 3 decrees. That's all the decrees gone, it must be. And now there is an Angel, and Will gets to untap with his hand full of nothing but islands, really. There is a Dominate, but that Dominate is not going to be stealing an Exalted Angel. I'm not really sure I like the Dominate line. The foil isn't really great here. I don't think playing a Powder Keg and starting to tick it up is going to make much of a difference. All right, Will agrees and just passes it over, because maybe he can cast a Powder Keg into a Brain Freeze and have 2 copies, and it's going to be harder to counterspell them. There's 3 cards there. I don't think this is enough, because Will goes to 15, then Will goes to 10, then Will goes to 5, and then Armand dies. So an additional threat has to be deployed here. We didn't see any Meddling Mages, right? No, there was a couple of Meddling Mages, right? Okay, here is a Meddling Mage. That is an important thing right now. So let's see if Will can answer this. There is a foil. Is that enough? That foil has been put in the grave in the wrong way. The lands need to go underneath it because they get discarded first. Okay, so now the Meddling Mage is in. Alright, what can Will draw here? A Brain Freeze is very good. A Vision Charm might be very good as well. There's 1 Vision Charm and 1 Brain Freeze. Gushes, obviously always useful to try and dig into more stuff. Is there another Meddling Mage coming here? Looking at the graveyard, seeing what was being cast so far makes me think that another one is being named. Aura of Silence. I don't think that matters. That's not what this game is about. Another Vision Charm. Powder Keg. Oh, that costs loads more mana, doesn't it? Because of the Aura of Silence here. This is just trying to dig out some cards from Armand's side of things. There's 1 card left in Armand's library. This is going to put William down to 8 life, I believe. So Armand has to deploy a threat this turn anyway, or he's dead, right? There's also the Dominate, which can steal the Meddling Mage and take it out of combat. If we've missed a damage somewhere. It took 5, then took 7. So that's a total of 12. Right, Vision Charm. Alright, scooping up the Vision Charm is enough to end the game. Alright. We're going to a third game. I wonder if the Dominates come out from Will's side here. They didn't seem to be that good. Alright, we're shuffling up now. I think William is mulliganed here. We'll find out in a second. Alright, we got Vision Charm. We got some foils. How many cards are going here? Is this a mull to 5 on Will's part? Yeah, looks like another mull to 5. Okay, so Armand just led off on an island and pass, and then Will followed back with the exact same play. On a Darker Waste, that opens up Counterspell and Disenchant here. And Accumulated Knowledge. I wonder how long we're in for this game. Is this going to be another one that's determined by a Brain Freeze? Just an island from Will here. They both are aware that there is a lot of time. There's not a lot of time left on the clock. So they're trying to play with some amount of urgency. Alright, we're going to see a Gush from Will. Is there any answer to this Fact or Fiction? There is not. This is awkward on Will's side of things. Aura of Silence is a good answer. They don't really care where the Eternal Dragon goes here because it just goes to the graveyard and comes back later. Separating the threats into 2 piles is sensible, but the Eternal Dragon is just going to end up as a threat anyway, just by being in the graveyard. Putting multiple lands with the Decree. Yeah, I think Will's decided against putting multiple lands with the Decree. Looks like Armand wanted the Decree here, even if it was only with 1 land. Then Will has to discard at end step after drawing those cards off the Gush. Back over to Will here. Is it time to start doing some Dreadnought things? Is that how this game is going to be won? Doesn't look like he's interested in it just yet. As we've seen from the previous game, there's a lot of this game to play. The way that Will loses this game most often is just going to be going in on a Dreadnought that then gets answered. But there's also going to be a bunch of games where he goes in on a Dreadnought and it's good enough. So it's very hard to navigate which one is which. Alright, looks like we're going to get a Stifle on... Oh, wrong card there. We're going to get a Stifle on the Decree and accidentally showed that there is a Vision Charm over there. Okay, there is an Impulse instead of making a couple of soldiers. But again, Armand is clearly wanting to get pressure going because that's what this game is actually going to end up being about. We're making a land drop. We are making a land drop. That island is not like the other islands. Multiple Dreadnoughts. Is it time to just take a spin on the Dreadnoughts? Alright, Will thought about it but decided against it. So we're going to see another Decree followed by another Stifle. A Counterspell. Weird to be fighting so deeply over this now because he gets to make 1 guy. Okay. We are counterspelling the Counterspell. So the Decree is just drawing a card. We're back with Armand. What are we doing here? Another Fact or Fiction. This is the main phase 1. Okay, it looks like we're doing a 4 and 1 pile. Bunch of lands and a Powder Keg or the Decree. Will is just trying to run Armand out of cards. Like, if he doesn't have any threats, then he's got all the time in the world to just let this game slowly tick by. The Fractured Furnace is starting to chew away at Will's graveyard. We've got an island here. There's already another island, so foil is already online. Is it time to play a Dreadnought? That is an annul. Do you let this go? No. Okay, so this is a foil. And then it's going to be a Vision Charm. This is going to protect the Dreadnought for a turn cycle as well. Is this Dreadnought going to go all the way? I'm skeptical. Will is kind of out of resources, so he kind of has to hope it is. But maybe Armand has signed up for this game where it was going to be a long game about Brain Freeze and isn't prepared for this game to suddenly be about Phyrexian Dreadnought. Especially with the way Will was playing this, burning all of his Stifles on trying to stop Decrees. Right, there is a Plough. This is just going to gain Will a bunch of life and hopefully make this game drag on longer in his mind. Well, I guess for both of them, they want the game to drag on longer in different ways, I guess. I think Will has the inevitability because of Brain Freeze, which is a weird position to put the blue-white control deck in. So blue-white control deck has to actually apply pressure. Otherwise, it will eventually just lose to the Brain Freezers. Because it's very hard to interact with Brain Freeze because of the Storm trigger. More Phyrexian Furnace action, and Armand passing back. So Brain Freeze has now entered the hand of William here. This decree is actually going to be active now. So this is going to put 5 power into play. Will, I believe, is on 22 life. So now he's going to take 5 and go down to 17 life. There is a powder keg off the top. Very nice. Is there an answer for this from Armand? That looks like a fact or fiction. Digging for an answer. Okay, counter spells are definitely answers. This is a very good selection of cards for Armand. He's either going to get 1 or 2 counter spells out of this. There's no way that you can stop him from having it. Which is definitely not really what Will wants to see. Young lad is fighting for his life here. He can afford to take 3 hits from this team of guys before he needs to find another answer. There's an argument to just stack both counterspells in a pile. Alright, we're going for the pile of 3, and then the counterspell is going to hit the powder keg. There is a Phyrexian Dreadnought, knowing that there's not a plough here. Disenchanting the Dreadnought. This does not look very good for Will here. But there could be quite a lot of games to play. Just 1 powder keg and we reset again. Is that 3 cards from an accumulated knowledge? That's a lot of cards. I think the only card left in Will's hand is a Brain Freeze. And Armand's library is quite thick still, so it's going to take a while to get through that. There's a decent chunk of cards. There's probably like 15 cards there. But with no cards in hand, it's going to be very hard for Will to get anywhere unless he just does gush into gush. Right, just playing out the island. At this point, if he draws a foil, he can just hard cast it. So this is going to put Will down to 7, I think. Not looking good for the Dreadnought player. I'm sure many of you out there are just happy to see Dreadnought players lose. Okay. Will needs a gush here. There was not a gush. So he's going to go... Does he go to 2 here? Oh, that's extra turns. I think they're in time. That's what that dice at the top is. So I think Will's life total is enough that he can afford to take this hit and he goes down to 2 life. So he was on 12 after the last hit. Yeah, that makes sense. He's taken 2 hits from a 5/5 and he gained an extra 12 life. He's just counting the library here. It's quite a lot of cards. Okay. We're going to see some more card draw here. I would be very reluctant about casting any card draw spells if I was Armand, because the only way Will gets back into this game is with a Brain Freeze, because he's not going to be able to answer all this stuff in play. Now, maybe the logic of I just have enough counter spells to get through is there as well. So you can counterspell a Gush, that's going to be okay. A Meddling Mage. What is this name? We don't know what this is naming, unfortunately, for the purposes of coverage. Meddling Mage names, and then they're sort of moving on. Right, this is going to be a hit for 10, which I think reduces Will to 2. So he has to win off of this turn. But if Armand's got a counterspell, he can just counterspell the Gush, which is pretty much what Will has to draw here. An Impulse. Wow, he's letting the Impulse go. That's interesting. With just 1 card in hand. Okay, so there is an AK that draws like 1,000,000 cards. Is Will going to pull this one out? It's possible. Here is an AK drawing a bunch of cards. Does Armand just not have any counterspells? He's worried about countering in case he fuels this Brain Freeze, which I think is why you need to go after the very first impulse here. Obviously, it's easy to sit back here knowing exactly what's in Will's hand and working out the best play. If he's only got 1 counterspell, trying to decide when to leverage it. I don't think there's any AKs in Will's graveyard. I think they're all in Armand's. He could just crack this Phyrexian Furnace and make the card draw 1 less. So what's Will looking for here? If he draws into a couple of Gushes, this is going to be an absolute disaster for Armand. Going for the Mana Leak, counterspelling that. Here is a brain freeze. So what have we got? 2, 3, 4. 4 times 3 is 12 cards. Is that enough? Drawing cards with an AK. This seems very risky. I don't know how many cards are in the library. This is going to draw so many cards it probably makes the brain freeze lethal. Although it might have been a case that the brain freeze was already lethal. So he's just trying to find an answer. Because you can't really count how many cards are in there. It doesn't look like many. Has Will managed to find it on the very last turn? Yeah? Oh. Okay, so that puts Will not only into the top 8, but that puts him first place in the standings. He goes 1 point ahead of me, I believe, in the standings for this one. And that does unfortunately knock Armand out of the tournament. But now it's time for the top 8. So these are the top 8 players with the Big Smoke banner behind them. So in first place is William Scannell, who is the Dreadnought player. In second place, Swiss standings, is me. And I have no idea why my face is doing that in the picture, but here we are, enjoy it. Third place was Enrico, who's playing the Domain deck that we saw on coverage earlier. Fourth place is Chris Cooper, who was the Enchantress player. Fifth place is Toby Bundy, who was on a Green-White Oath build. Sixth place is Brad Barkley, who was on the Allurin. Seventh place is Sam Gomersall, who you may know if you're an old Magic boomer. I believe he won a GP and top 8'd 3 Pro Tours. So a pretty stacked field here today. And in last place is Sean Flanagan, who was the blue-white control player that we saw earlier as well. I think he was the one who lost to Brad. So he managed to win his last round and get into the top 8. And that is our top 8 players. Okay, we're now at the quarterfinal. I believe on the left we have Sean playing blue-white control. And on the right we have Will playing Phyrexian Dreadnought or Mono Blue Stiflenought, if you wish. This matchup is an interesting one. If the Dreadnought player can come out with a really good early hand, then it can win. But otherwise, the blue-white control player can sort of dominate and just have a bunch of useful interactions, things like the Swords to Plowshares, and then you have Meddling Mages as well, which can really cause a problem for the Dreadnought player. But as we've seen earlier, the ability for the Dreadnought player to pivot into a Brain Freeze plan is really strong, and that might be an angle that Will's going to try in the post-board games. But if Sean can take down the first game pre-sideboarded, then I think that puts him in a really, really good spot, because it's not always easy to get the Brain Freeze kill off. You kind of need to have a lot of things go the right way for you. Okay, so Will is starting the game off with a nice peak here. What have we got here? We have Disenchant, which is an answer for a Phyrexian Dreadnought, 2 counter spells, and an Impulse. So Sean simply doesn't have to ever tap out here. Can just hold up all of this mana for as long as he needs to. That's not a bad position for for Sean to find himself in. He's going to maybe struggle to put a clock on this game, which might give Will time to, cantrip his way to something useful here. There is a Dreadnought Send, so there could be a Dreadnought Send here. Is there? Okay, so if William had himself access to a free counterspell like a foil, he could have gone for this line where he played the Dreadnought and then phased out using the Vision Charm. But because he didn't have the counterspell in hand immediately, he couldn't do that, which means that Sean's going to get to untap and just hold up counter magic. So it's going to be very difficult to thread this Phyrexian Dreadnought through everything that Sean is holding up. I believe he's got a Thwart in hand now, so he can deploy a Dreadnought with counterspell backup. But the problem with that is that he's not going to be able to counterspell the turn after either. Although this could be a Phyrexian Dreadnought with Stifle Send and then use the Vision Charm as a protective piece. I imagine that Sean is going to fight on the stack. The Dreadnought deck only contains 4 Dreadnoughts, so if you fight the Dreadnoughts rather than the blue spells, you can sort of pinch the amount of payoffs they have for what their deck is trying to do, and maybe they'll run out of threats that way, whereas they have a lot of redundancy, and William is holding up 2 potential ways of triggering this Dreadnought, so a Stifle and a Vision Charm here. I think we're going to see a mana leak. The Thwart is not really the sort of mana that's desired here. Okay, so we're floating mana and we're thwarting. So the problem with this is that we're going to see the Vision Charm here, but all Sean has to do is untap, wait till William's upkeep, and then disenchant the Dreadnought. And we already know that the disenchant is over there. So unless there's a free spell, like a foil in there for William, he's not going to be able to keep this Dreadnought around. Okay, we've gone to the main phase now. I don't like waiting on this disenchant, but it has worked. There was not a second Vision Charm there. So I think you're just sort of letting things be slightly riskier because a whole boatload of things come available once William's got his blue mana up for his Vision Charm. We're just doing some draw go action from Sean's side, which is exactly where his deck wants to be. So now there is a foil here. We're going to see another Dreadnought send. So this is going to be the counterspell. William's going to fire back with a foil, pitching 2 cards, including a Flash of Insight, which he can then get going later on. This is a Stifle. If there's any interaction here, that's kind of the end of it. All right, it's a Swords to Plowshares. I think William is going to be really struggling to win this game now. He spent so many resources to get that second Dreadnought in, well, and the first as well. It just means that he's kind of running on empty. He's just got an island in hand. He's going to need to string together some gushes to try and get back in this game. We're going to see a Sabo's Web. That's not going to do anything. I don't believe William is on any Mishra's Factories in his list, which is personally the list I like as well. I think that was a counter spell that was drawn. William is keeping the island in hand, which allows him to draw a foil and actually have it be relevant. Okay, we're seeing a counter spell on that impulse, just trying to stop Sean sculpting his hand, because he doesn't really have the mana to play a Dreadnought and then protect it with a counter spell. It's just going to be a case of trying to slow the game down. By playing this island out, it tells us that it's relatively likely that William has drawn another island. There's Temple of the False God doing some work here to get additional little guys in. And then we're drawing from the cycling. That is 4 power, made at instant speed uncounterably. Obviously, Stifle is a way that you can interact with that, and that is a card that William's got in his deck. But this position from the blue-white control player is incredibly dominant. What is William going to have to offer here? It's going to be tough. I think that was a impulse, perhaps. We're just going to see land go, land go, land go from Sean here, and I think that's exactly where he wants to be. He can... What's he got? 2 cards there? Alright, an impulse from William. It just resolves straight away. There is a Dreadnought there. He's obviously going to be part of the plan. But not only has he got to assemble the Dreadnought combo, he's got to protect it from anything that Sean can have. At least he's got a lot of life from that Swords to Plowshares on the previous Phyrexian Dreadnought, which is going to give him extra turns to try and sculpt a plan together. I think Sean is probably not looking to have this many lands in play at this point. He'd rather have a few more action spells. Although we're cracking this fetch land now. Have we got a play? I'm not sure what play he would necessarily have at sorcery speed here, unless he's just going for like an Exalted Angel and just trying to get that stuck in. Because clearly Will isn't really able to assemble a combo and interact with Sean right now. Okay, just fetching around Stifle is all that was. We've got an untap. We're back with Sean again. 4 damage coming in. This is now going to take Will below his starting life total. I don't think it looks great for Will on this side. Okay, so we have a Stifle, a Dreadnought, and a Counterspell. It's not going to get much better than this for Will. So I think he's going for it now. So here is an Impulse. It's resolving. There's 2 cards that Sean's packing as well as whatever he gets off of this Impulse. Will can fight once here, but not multiple times. So a Counterspell gets hit with a Counterspell. And then it's pretty evident that the last card in Will's hand is going to be something that works with the Dreadnought. It's the Stifle. And now we've got a bit of a race on our hands. So the soldier tokens can't attack that effectively. Alright, we're blocking one of the tokens. Just forcing through 3 damage. This could just be a Wrath of God, which is what I think is going to happen. Okay, Akroma's Vengeance. It's like Wrath of God, but bigger. It hits everything that's non-land, basically. In this format, at least. It doesn't hit Planeswalkers because they didn't exist back then. Just sorting out what lands are being tapped to make this happen. It's a pretty cool spell. It's one of the attractions to playing this Temple of the False God build of blue-white control, because you can play that on turn 5 because of the temples. And it's just a nice catch-all. I've played Nivenrol's Disc a fair amount, and it's a similar sort of effect, except you don't have to wait a turn, so it just seems better most of the time. You're a deck that wants to be playing land drops, and when it's bad, it cycles, so it's a pretty cool addition. All right, we've got a Portent from Will here. There is a free counterspell. There is a Stifle. If he doesn't have a Dreadnought, though, he probably has to send this back, because that's his only win condition. Okay, maybe he does have a Dreadnought. All right, this is a big Decree of Justice in the end step here, with some Temple of the False God mana really firing it off. How many have we got? 7. So this is a 2-turn clock, which is a good place for Sean to be. He just needs to get this going. Are we going to see anything from Will's side? He basically needs to play a Dreadnought, but also deal with a guy here, because a Dreadnought isn't good enough. Okay. He drew the Stifle a little bit too late to interact with the cycle trigger on the Decree of Justice. I think Sean winning game 1 is absolutely enormous here, because from the sideboard he's going to board in the Meddling Mages and he's going to board in the Nulls. The game is mostly going to come down to whether or not the Brain Freezes work on Will's side, but Sean has been prioritizing getting a clock in as well, so it's not necessarily going to give him enough time. All right, we're seeing the Dominates come in. That's just to steal the Meddling Mages so they can start attacking, and then maybe Sean is forced to plow the Meddling Mage. I think from Sean's side we can see, what's that? Seed of Cleansing. Is that only one Meddling Mage? Okay, so we're getting a handful of tools in. Our opponents are presenting their decks to one another. Will is going to be on the play here, which does give them the option of trying to get a turn 2 Dreadnought. Sometimes going underneath the blue-white control deck is the way you need to go when you're playing from the Dreadnought side here. There is a Dreadnought in the hand. I don't think there's a combo piece to go with it. In terms of Sean's side, all I can really make out is a Swords to Plowshares, which is obviously a great card in the match. I think there might also be a Disenchant, with also probably my favourite Disenchant art as well. All right, we've got a Portent from William, just shuffling his deck. Didn't like what he saw. Accidentally dropped a Phyrexian Dreadnought while shuffling, so Sean knows that he doesn't have 4 Dreadnoughts in hand, I guess. And then we're going to pass over, and he's going to draw the card off the Portent. I imagine we're going to see a white source from Sean here, and then a pass. Okay, Accumulated Knowledge. That's a way to sort of start delving into the game. This is an opt. A sorcery speed opt suggests that he's looking to hit a land drop. And the fact that he played the card off the top rather than putting it to his hand definitely sells the story that he was really looking for a land drop on that one to Sean. Sean drew and deployed an island. I suspect he's not going to be doing anything, just relying on the end of turn Decree of Justice, sorry. Okay, so we're seeing a crack of the fetch down at the end step from Sean. I suspect this is going to be something like an Impulse. Just keeping everything as instant speed as possible. There is a Phyrexian Dreadnought combo assembled in William's hand, but whether or not he can actually deploy it safely is another matter. If he gets more lands, then he can obviously start firing off some counter spells alongside it. He's looking for some free counter magic. Okay, so there's an Impulse in William's hand, which is probably what this turn cycle is going to be for him. The question is, does he fire the Impulse off in response to this Impulse? Or does he wait? Alright, he's just going to let this Impulse go. Because if Sean tries to battle with the Impulse in his own turn, it's going to leave him with less mana to battle on William's turn. But if you really wanted to resolve that Impulse, that was definitely the time to do it. But I think William is okay with Sean spending mana. Okay, a sorcery speed spell. It's a Meddling Mage. There is a counter spell from Will. We're going to untap. Is this the time where Will gets stuck in? There's blue mana up, which could represent a null, so I don't think Will is ready to try and fight through that. He just wants to try and leverage his card draw spells like the Impulse and the Accumulated Knowledge. We're going for an Accumulated Knowledge before the Impulse here. Ooh, it's worth a counterspell to Sean. Probably trying to stop him hitting islands. Just keep him under wraps, because if he's got fewer spells he can cast, he's not going to be able to fight as well, which means Sean can just leverage all the control angle that he's got in his hand right now. We've got a pass. No land from Sean, which means his hand is stacked with interaction. So this Accumulated Knowledge is for 2 cards. So this is a lot stronger than the previous one. There is a Brain Freeze. That is the best win condition in Will's deck, to be honest. I think we're just going to see draw, go, draw, go, draw, go, until Sean has assembled a threat base that is going to actually put the hurt onto Will, and then he's going to go for like a big play. All right, we've got an Impulse in response to this Fact or Fiction. Because what Will ideally wants to do is make a big fight over a Phyrexian Dreadnought and then go over the top with counter magic into Brain Freeze. Right, the impulse has resolved. Are we going to see any counter magic? We're going to see an accumulated knowledge drawing 3 cards this time. Little 2 mana Ancestral Recall. Is he going to have to go to cleanup here? He might do. Here is the pile. So I think Will is very happy to see sorcery speed threats. What he doesn't want is the Decree of Justice, because if Sean has to tap out to deploy either an angel or a dragon, that's going to just give Will a chance to try and thread some spells together on his turn without having to worry about any interaction, because Sean's interaction is not going to be free. He's not going to be running like the foils and things. He's going to have, you know, actual factual counterspell, mana leaks, Swords to Plowshares, disenchant, stuff like that. The only thing that he can get ahead of time is a Seal of Cleansing. Threats versus lands. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think the threat pile is possibly what gets taken here, because the dragon can just be a land anyway. But I think Sean's also happy to take the lands. Any fact or fiction pile where your opponent takes a smaller pile is usually a situation where you've made the correct piles. Okay, so Will is deciding what he's keeping. He's really prioritizing this dominate. He's going to get rid of a Phyrexian Dreadnought here, surely. Having to discard all those cards after the accumulated knowledge is a little bit awkward for sure. So he's getting rid of a Dreadnought and an island. So really he only got a little cantrip off of that. It was more like a looting effect, if you will. Someone's just going to play a land out, which is exactly what he wants to do. It's time for a threat. Holding up Counterspell. Back over on Will's side of things. Is he ready to make a big fight? I think this is probably just going to be a dominate. There it is. So stealing the angel here is kind of a big deal. It gets a counterspell out of Sean's hand. Not bad. I don't know if Sean's going to just tap out for this angel and just try and put the clock on. If Sean can gain himself enough life and make the Phyrexian Dreadnought take more turns to hit, then that also buys him more time to sculpt afterwards. I think Will's just doing some maths on how big he can go on his turn and how many cards can be milled. Because there's obviously still a pretty thick stack of deck there. Okay, 23 plays 16. So one more hit and Sean buys himself an additional turn of taking Phyrexian Dreadnought damage. But as we discussed, this game is not going to be about Phyrexian Dreadnought damage. There is 8 mil of the Vision Charm, plus the Brain Freeze, plus a couple of Dreadnoughts that can be played. But at this point, I'm not even sure that Sean wants to fight on the stack at all with Phyrexian Dreadnoughts. Alright, another fact or fiction. This might be a spot where Will wants to start fighting, but we're just going for a counterspell. But because he didn't try and play out the Dreadnoughts, he's not got the Storm count he really needs here. So Sean's probably just going to untap Kraken again. Pretty close to being another hit from the Dreadnought as well. Every multiple of 12 makes things a lot better. Okay, so here is the Portent. What do we got here? The Gush is really, really strong. So I think next turn, William's got a really good shot at trying to mill out Sean. An Impulse. That's fine. So I think what Will's probably going to try and do is play a Dreadnought next turn. Hope that it gets fought with on the stack. And then play another Dreadnought. Hope that gets fought with on the stack. And then fire a flurry of like Gush and Vision Charms and see if he can mill Sean out here. It's going to be a tight one because he needs Sean to help him out with the Storm count, but Sean can just let the Dreadnoughts go because they're not really relevant on this board because he's going to win the race if they come down. So I don't think Sean's going to fall for the bait. And he's also got a Swords to Plowshares, so he knows he can cover it once it's in play. And it's just the Brain Freeze that he needs to be worried about here. Because it's going to be aware to Sean that that's the main win condition from this point onwards. So this is the turn that Will has to go for it. So we're going to see a Gush to begin with. The dice in play represents the amount of mana that he's got floating. So we're going to see a Portent. Just building up Storm here. He doesn't get these cards immediately. And he doesn't have any redraw either. Right, Phyrexian Dreadnought. There's no reason for Sean to do anything here. Alright, he's getting a counterspell for his troubles though. That's pretty good. What about another Dreadnought? This is exactly how Will has drawn this one up. He wants Sean to fight again. And now he's going to Vision Charm Sean for 4 cards. I don't know if this is enough Storm because we don't have library counters. We don't know how many cards are left. But he's doing what he's got to do. Right. It's resolved. That's 4 cards. We're seeing another one. I do like the Brain Freeze plan here. A Fact or Fiction here is wild to me because this is going to mill you for 5. I don't believe he's got any free counter magic. I'm not a fan of this strategy at all. Obviously, we don't know how many cards are in the library, so Sean might have calculated how many cards in the library and knows that this is going to be fine to cast. But it seems a little bit worrying to me. Could be seeing a Brain Freeze win here. And now we're going to see the Brain Freeze. Oh, we need to finish resolving that Vision Charm. Okay, the Vision Charm is resolved now. So there's 6 cards there. That should be lethal. So they're just counting up. I think there's 6 copies plus 2 more. Let's see how deep we go. If I was Sean, I would just consider just counting the cards in the library and scooping so that he doesn't get to see how he's sideboarded for the matchup. Alright. So Will manages to clap back with the Brain Freeze plan. I wonder what happens if he doesn't cast the Fact or Fiction now. I'm not sure what the Storm count was. I think it was pretty high though, because 6 copies of Brain Freeze just from what William cast that turn. There was a 7, so that's what, 21 cards being milled after already having milled 8. So I think it might not have been a situation where Sean could live anyway. Alright, we're going to a game 3. Players are drawing their opening hands for game number 3. Looks like a Vision Charm and a Stifle here. Stifle does some really good work on William's side of things because it allows him to interact with the Decree of Justice, which is the best win condition, in my opinion, that Sean has access to because it's instant speed, which allows him to hold up all of his permission. Sean has a counterspell. Can't really make out what else is over there, though. Just playing some Island Go action. Back over here, we've got a Dreadnought that could be used, but I don't think that Will wants to use his Vision Charms that way. Here comes an Impulse on Sean's side of the board. What are we going to see? Alright. Selected his card and moving on. It was clearly a slightly difficult choice. We've got a Darker Waste. Just keep making land drops. That's Sean's job for the first 5 or 6 turns of this game, is just to keep making land drops and holding up permission. And then what Will wants to do is sculpt a hand using Portents and things like that. Interesting that Will doesn't want to play out the island there. Keeping it up for the foil makes some amount of sense. So that's probably his best way of interacting with a Meddling Mage. He might not have got any bounce spells available, so he just has to answer the Meddling Mage on the stack. But if Sean wants to play the Meddling Mage here, it'll be difficult because you can possibly back it up with a counterspell, so William's going to be in a bit of trouble. We've got an end of turn Impulse from Sean's side of things. Just selecting for all the answers. Quite often these matchups are won by whoever casts the most cantrips, because you just end up with the best hand to win a fight, and this game is going to come down to one big fight usually. We've got a 5th land drop from Sean, perhaps. There we go. Is there going to be a Meddling Mage time? It is Meddling Mage time. If this names Dreadnought, that cuts off the Dreadnought line. If it names Brain Freeze, it cuts off that line. It just puts Will in a really awkward spot. There are 2 Brain Freezes, I believe, in Will's list, so we might be able to do a little Brain Freeze and then do a bigger Brain Freeze later on. Okay, it feels like the foil is coming down here, but this is going to be clearly into a counterspell, unfortunately. Unfortunately for Will, that is. Great news for Sean. This does mean that William can untap and maybe deploy a Dreadnought or 2 and hope that's good enough. I would be interested to sort of pick his brains about not going for the Dreadnought there, because he had double Dreadnought into what was just 1 white mana open, I think. So maybe he would have been all right there. All right, we've got a morph. The threats are going to start coming. 2 damage off the meddling mage. William is falling behind quite a lot here. Like, he's got a hand that works to do Dreadnought stuff, but not really to do the Brain Freeze stuff. Obviously, he probably can't play Dreadnought because that's what the meddling mage is named, actually, rather than the Brain Freeze. That explains why he didn't do that play. That would make a lot of sense. And now we're just getting crashed in. Meddling mage has just completely stifled William's ability to play this game. Because he's got a hand that just does Dreadnought things for now. Because meddling mage doesn't counter spells. It means you can't play them. So he can't even use them to generate storm if he does find a Brain Freeze. He's going down to 6 life. He's dead on board. He needs to draw something really impressive here. Well, Gush is a very impressive Magic the Gathering card. Let's see if he can dig his way out of this. I'm skeptical. We got a Ponder. That's going to have to find a bounce spell this turn. None of those do it. Alright, he's just scooping it up. And that is the end of the quarterfinal. Sean takes it down 2-1. The Meddling Mage very good against the Dreadnought plan there. And once he's covered the Dreadnought plan, it becomes very easy to just do the aggro and win because you don't have to worry about the Dreadnought so much. And that's what he did. He just put the clock down. And that's the end of that one. So Sean makes it to the semi-finals. However, the semi-finals were not played at this tournament. The top 4 decided to split because there was a little bit of technical difficulty partway through the event, so it was getting quite late. So decided to call it there, and the top 4 split the prizes and went on their way. I believe it was agreed to let Sam Gummersall be the winner when it came to like who ended up with the technical first place there. He did fly all the way from Malta, so let the lad have it. Seems fair enough to me. And that is the end of the tournament. I hope you enjoyed some coverage. Let me know what you think if you'd like to see more of this coverage. I will probably be doing it for all of the Big Smoke events this year, like the quarterlies, as well as the UK Premodern Nationals, which is going to have its first ever appearance this year in May, which I'm really looking forward to. I think we've got 128 players, and that was the cap. Next year is probably going to have to be bigger because it's sold out so quickly because everyone loves the Premodern format. All right, thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe to the channel. I do a lot of pre-modern content. And goodbye.